This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, everybody? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And we are back for another edition of the Primetime Podcast right here on Most Valuable Podcast. And Brandon, it is a great time of the year. You want to know why?
I think I know why.
Because we are now, I know the NFL draft is a few weeks away, and we would love to be able to have a few draft topics, but we are now basically we're giving the fast break everything with the draft. You know what? 2 weeks to go. Here you go, buddy. Sean, Dave, let's run with it. I'm with it too, but we're going to run with it because you and I are now going pretty much full, into college football mode here on the podcast, and we are beginning our trek through our team preview, starting with the SEC. We're going to be finishing in August with the Pac-12, with the other three, ACC, Big Ten, and the Big 12 mixed into the middle. How this is going to work if you're on podcast services around the world, we're just going to go 1 through 7 on half of the SEC this week. We'll get the other half next week. If you're on YouTube, you will be individual segments for each team and posted at the end. Before we get to our podcast, though, a little bit of housekeeping here at the beginning. I'll keep it brief. Number one, if you want to support us, go to patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast for $10. You can come on a podcast and join Brandon and I, or any podcast that you want, at MVP. That link down below in the description. You can also check out our store, get our shirt, get a nice MVP t-shirt. That link also down below in the description. Mostvaluablepodcast.com is where you catch MVP each and every day. And also, if you're on Apple Podcasts, you're on iTunes, you have an Apple Podcast, you have an iTunes account, please go over and give the Primetime Podcast a 5-star rating, and then type a little something about what you think about the podcast, why someone should check it out, because the only rating and the only review, or the only review that you and I have, is still that one that calls us good old boys, because apparently all we talk about is the SEC. And
now we're talking about
that comment would be right today, because we are talking only SEC on the podcast. This one going to be the SEC West. So we're going to start from the bottom. We're going to trek through, get all the way to the top for the standings last year. And let's start with the bottom feeders in the West from last year, the Arkansas Razorbacks. And kind of to set things up before I ask you the first question, I always do, this is a team that is coming off of a 4-8 record from last year, but that was under old regime, Brandon. Former head coach Bret Bielema was that 4-8 head coach. They got new coach coming in. They got Chad Morris, who was recently with SMU. He's going to bring not only a new offensive philosophy to this team, there's also going to be some new defensive philosophies as he's bringing in defensive coordinator John Chavis as well. So the thing I want to ask you is basically, I want to get to the point with this one right from the start, because I feel like we can do this with these bottom feeders. This is a team that was 4-8 last year. New coach coming in. History usually tells us that they don't jump up right to the top of divisions no matter where you are. What can fans expect with Chad Morris? And is that going to be reflective in the win-loss column, do you think, this year for the Arkansas Razorbacks?
Well, what they can clearly expect, and what you kind of mentioned, is a complete change in philosophy and a complete change in scheme. Whereas Bret Bielema was very much the pro-style, ground-and-pound type of guy, Chad Morris, coming from SMU and the Mustangs, is bringing over his version of the spread offense, which is much more up-tempo and quick and fast-moving, which may be a bit of a change for the guys to start with on offense. But looking at how they were last season, Arkansas struggled mightily throughout the year, and certainly within their conference. They were 1-7. They went 1-7 in their conference. And like you said,
it's a tough conference.
4-8 overall. It is a very tough conference, and I get that, but you want to be better than 1-7. That's why I look at 4-8, what they did last year. You'd like to think that they can improve on that by at least 1 to 2 wins. When you look at their schedule, the first couple of games they should start off 3-0. But for us to start off, they're going to have a quarterback competition. they're going to have a quarterback competition here. And I know that Cole Kelly is the number one guy that people would look at because he has the most game experience. Cole Kelly last year completed 58% of his passes, over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, but he did have 4 interceptions. However, with the other two guys, Ty Storey and Dalton Hyatt, it's a clean slate. It's a clean slate for these guys because it's a new coach with a new scheme. And that's why I think that there is a quarterback competition. This is going to be open, and it could be anyone's gig. If one performs better than the other, I don't think Cole Kelly's locked into it. People may think that he is because he did start a number of games last season and was the guy that they ended up going with at the end of the year there. But I think that this is going to be very interesting to see how things start. But even bigger, and we can talk about this too a little bit more, is going to be the offensive line. They returned 4 starters, but they were awful last season. They were really bad. Outside of Frank Ragnow, who is now gone and with the Detroit Lions.
He was a first-round pick. He was
their center. The rest of the guys struggled. They gave up 35 sacks. And that's not going to help your quarterback for whoever is back there.
Yeah.
So if they don't figure things out there on the offensive line, whoever they put back there at quarterback is not going to have a good season.
Well, and the thing that I think about is first what you mentioned with the quarterback competition. And the thing that does not help, well, in my mind, does not help from a fan perspective of who you want at the quarterback position is in their spring game, identical stats. Both Kelly and you had Ty Storey, 126 yards and a touchdown. Both of them. So it's like, well, great. I can't look at the stats to see who did better because they did identically the same. But if we look at comments from Coach Chad Morris after that game, he said this: we saw some good, we saw some bad. I saw some plays that should have been made. I also saw some really good throws. But we asked these guys just to be present. Don't be perfect. You can't be perfect. Just be present. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. And there's a little part of that, I mean, I get what he's trying to say. You can't be perfect. Basically, this team, we're going to start from the ground. We're going to build it on up. But with that comment, when he says, just be present, I get the mindset of, all right, I'm here, and that's all I need to be, where I would take that a step further. Let's strive for that perfection, although we know we're not going to be perfect. But I know that's probably not what he was getting at with those comments. However, the thing that I look at is, I'm looking at a story here from SECcountry.com, which is, this was from April, and their opinion is that Ty Storey might be the guy that you go with over Cole Kelly, at least for right now. And the big thing that it's going to be is, like you said, Cole Kelly having the most experience. Is that going to win him? Is that going to help him enough in this quarterback competition to where I'm kind of looking at this, and I'm going to say that based on what we've seen so far, because neither of them have really stuck out their head and said, I'm the guy. They're kind of right the same after the spring game. I think that it is safer to say that maybe Ty Storey has the upper edge in this quarterback battle because Chad Morris coming in. It's kind of like what we talked last week with FSU. Willie Taggart comes into FSU. Hey, I didn't recruit you. I didn't recruit you. You're both on a level playing field to me. So this really is Ty Storey. If he can play up and prove that, hey, I can play just as well as Cole Kelly, I just might have the experience, he might be able just to win that job because it's a new head coach in Chad Morris and not Brett Bielema as the head coach of the Razorbacks.
Yeah, and I think that that's why anyone who says that it's definitely going to be Cole Kelly or it's definitely going to be Ty Storey, we don't know that yet. And the reason being is because it's not a guy who, yes, he ended up getting more playing time last season, and it's coming in again under the same head coach. it's like you mentioned, completely new head coach, completely new scheme. This is anybody's job, and it really is going to be what they saw and what they liked from spring ball, and then what they see and who's going to progress the best and come out as the bigger leader over the summer. That's going to be the number one thing, and then starting out in fall, that's when we're going to see ultimately who they end up going with. But again, I think it's so important that they really figure out what's going to happen on that offensive line. While it was certainly a disaster for stretches last year, I think that they just need to get better in that pass protection. That's going to be the key. They have veterans there on the offensive line. They have guys who have been there, certainly at least 1 year under their belt. This is now going to be something where they have to step up. They need to do better. They need to pick up their blocks a lot better. They need to slow guys down on the other side, and that's difficult when you're going up against defenses like Auburn, like Alabama, like LSU. That gets difficult, but you need to be better. You need to be quicker. You need to be faster. You need to be stronger, and you just cannot allow 35 sacks on the season, because you will not win games. You will be 1-7 again in your conference, and you'll go 4-8.
Well, the one guy, I want to turn attention from offense to defense now, and the one guy that I was kind of going to focus in on for the defense is Kevin Richardson. And the big reason I'm focusing in on Richardson is back in early May, he was given a 6th year of eligibility. So he'll be able to play in his 6th year of eligibility for this year, which, I mean, he came out on a Twitter, I almost said Twitter tweet, that would have been stupid, a tweet, and said, "Finally official, man, ready to put that Razorback logo on for one more year. Y'all in for something special this year, Hogs fans, hashtag WPS." And for me, this is something defensively that if I'm a Razorbacks fan, I'm doing one of these. Oh, thank God we're getting him back. Because he is a guy that, yeah, he played majority in the nickel role last year for Arkansas, but he is a guy who was a team captain for them last year, and you need a guy like that coming back, especially when you have a new defensive coordinator, like I mentioned, John Chavez coming in. He can use that and say, all right, I've got a guy that I can lean on to kind of be that team captain role, because he had that last year. Plus, like I said, when he was in the nickel role for mostly that year, should do that again. And then Arkansas can have the ability to use more of that 4-2-5 defense that they like to do and can use under Chavez.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that they need to do is improving up front. They only had 19 sacks last season in 12 games. What I think might hurt them is the fact that they have a lack of depth.
And we know we got some quarterbacks
roster
in this division too, or in this SEC as well. So you got to be able to get after them no matter who you're playing.
That's true. That's true. I think that the number one thing is going to be for them getting stops. They allowed teams to convert on third down 48% of the time last year. That is not going to get you victories. You need to be able to stop teams. And I think that guys like you talked about, like Richardson, he's going to be a spark plug on this team that's going to be able to help that. So you have a new coach, new head coach, new defensive coordinator, new scheme. I think that the talent is there, at least the starter talent is there. Like I mentioned, depth behind those starters, they're thin. They're thin. So you have to hope and pray that you don't have a whole lot of injuries. Otherwise, you may be having to tinker back and forth with a defense that isn't especially deep.
Well, and the thing that I'm kind of looking at here is I'm looking at the schedule finally. And like you mentioned way back when you gave your first response for this segment, you were like, you know what, they should jump out 3-0. And they should. I mean, Eastern Illinois, Colorado State, and North Texas are not the same level of opponents. Like last year, they started out week 2 against TCU. Like this year, they're out of conference games. It looks like, all right, we're not going to go up to that level. We know we're not at the level of playing other Power 5 teams. We can't even beat the guys that are in our own conference. That's not a knock against Arkansas. It's just the truth. You were 1-7 last year in the SEC. I feel like the big games, if I'm targeting wins, and I know the players aren't going to think like this, but I am. And the big games that you need to get wins in are the 3 to start: Eastern Illinois, Colorado State, North Texas, and then Tulsa in late October. Other than that, you just got to, like, with this season in the SEC, last year your only win came against Ole Miss. I don't know. I know we're going to get into Ole Miss next. They're the next team we're going to look at. I don't know if I can for surely say, hey, you know what? That's going to be a win for the Razorbacks this year. That one could go in the way of Ole Miss. But I look at every other SEC team that they are going to play. You're not going to beat Auburn. You're not going to beat Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher there. You're not going to beat Alabama. You're not going to beat LSU. You're not going to beat Mississippi State. That means to me, the only 3 games that could be winnable, and I'm going to use air quotes because winnable might be a little bit of a stretch depending on who you're talking to: Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, and Mizzou. Vanderbilt, I'll give a loss. I'll say the only 2 that you might be able to win if it's like a, whoa, holy crap, we won games, is Ole Miss and Mizzou to end the season.
So Ole Miss, not to give too much away, but Ole Miss, I think they're going to have a pretty high-powered offense. It's going to be, does the defense show up? Because the defense was not around last season. But that's also the problem for Arkansas, is that, I mean, you look at last season, their defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. They're letting, on the running side of the football, they give up almost 200 yards a game, and then they're giving up over 200 yards a game to quarterbacks through the air. If you cannot stop and you cannot get pressure up front, you are not going to be successful. So that's where they need to, number one, the front line, the first line of defense there, that's going to be the most important thing for the Arkansas Razorbacks this year. And that's why I look at Ole Miss, and originally I would have said, oh, yeah, I mean, Ole Miss, that's a game that they could possibly win. But Ole Miss is kind of, as much turmoil as they have been in and are still going to be in terms of sanctions and everything like that. They've got a new coach there as well. And I think they're trying to turn the corner too. So that will be very interesting.
Here's the thing, and this is, I know on the onside kick, when Mark and I start talking, the thing we love to focus in on are those games where it's like, well, this one was a 1-score game. This one was a 1-score game. The ball bounces a different way. It's a different score. What happens? And I look at it, and I know I can't take wins away from you last year. You earned those 4 wins, but you can't be feeling super confident if you're a Razorback fan knowing that you only beat Ole Miss 38-37, and you only beat Coastal Carolina 39-38. And I know that people are going to say, and it's rightfully so, Ricky, that was Brett Bielema's team. You can't compare that team to this team, especially when we haven't seen this team under Chad Morris take the field except for the spring game. I will give you that. But if I'm going to use last year as a little bit of a reference at all, those 2 games, 1 point, the ball bounces a different way, 1 score doesn't go your way, you're now not 4-8 last year, you are 2-10 last year, which it's still a losing record. Bielema probably still gets fired, but then if those would have been losses, we might be less optimistic, is what I'm trying to say, about the Razorbacks. If that would have happened, they would have went 2-10.
I want to jump to the other side of the ball again for a minute here on offense. I think we just need to remember, too, Jared Cornelius, he was their top guy. He goes down after Game 3. He's back this year. They've got Jonathan Nance, who emerged towards the end of the season. He's returning this year. Deion Stewart's returning this year. So there's a number of guys that are going to have a chance to shine, and then newcomers who are going to be slotted in that are going to have an opportunity. So whoever the quarterback ends up being, whether it's Cole Kelly, Ty Story, they're going to have guys who were fairly inexperienced last year but got the opportunities to play, or obviously in the situation of Cornelius was injured. He's healthy. He's back. You have some options. You have some weapons there. And then on the running back side of the
I was
football,
just going to say, you've got
another battle between four different guys: Devwa Whaley, Chase Hayden, T.J. Hammonds, and JUCO transfer Rakeem Boyd. So you have Whaley, who's the guy who's coming in, who's got probably the most experience there. Chase Hayden's your speedster guy. T.J. Hammonds is more of your dynamic, can do it all guy, and then Rakeem Boyd. You know, if you don't think that you need him, you don't go get the JUCO guy and try and bring him into your program.
And the thing that I'll just add to that, because while you were talking about the wideouts, I was thinking running back, because and correct me if I was wrong, if I misheard you earlier, you had mentioned that with Chad Morris coming in, that offense is going to be more ground and pound, correct? That's what you said earlier?
No, with Chad Morris coming in, it's going to be what Bielema was ground and pound, whereas Chad Morris coming in, he's doing more of a spread offense, which is where a T.J. Hammonds and a Chase Hayden could be your guys' speed and having that dynamic ability. Bielema was the ground and pound was with him, and that's out the door.
Here's the thing I wonder then, with that being the case. I just wanted to make sure I heard you earlier correctly. Was I wonder if this will be we use it all the time on the onside kick with teams, a running back by committee team, where, you know what, because we're running the spread, there might be some packages that are better for Wally. There might be some packages that are better for TJ. There might be some that are better for Chase. Hell, there might be some that are better for Rakeem in the end. That's what I think that they might go with running back wise. Is all right. Whaley might be he's going to be the one that starts, but expect to see these other ones, because the thing that you got to look at last year is, Whaley started 11 games last year. He wasn't the leading rusher. He was not the leading rusher. The leading rusher was David Williams, their transfer from South Carolina.
And he was a senior. He's gone.
Adios. He's out of here. So, I mean, just because one of these guys might be the starter, using air quotes, I expect to see all four of these guys, if not three of these guys at the least, being used by Chad Morris in different ways in the spread offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're going to see all of these guys kind of get an opportunity. Whereas the quarterback competition, there's going to be a guy that you go with, you stick with. With the running back battle, they're all going to bring something different to the table, which is why you want to fit all of them into the game at some point. And like you said, it becomes that running back by committee, which we see a lot more in college, and it's obviously becoming something more in the NFL too, where certain situations call for speed, certain situations call for a little bit more muscle. You need 1 yard, you bring in the big guy to get you that 1 yard. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes and how that running back in the backfield is going to help whoever the quarterback is. That's going to be, I think, really interesting to watch as well.
Last question I want to ask you before we move on to the next team, which will be Ole Miss. With the schedule, before I ask you just your final thoughts of how you might think this season goes for Arkansas, I want to give you this scenario. Let's say they go 4 wins again, those wins being all of their non-conference games, Eastern Illinois, Colorado State, North Texas, and Tulsa, and they lose every single SEC game. What would you think in that scenario would be or should be the feeling for Hog Nation, I'll call them, at the end of the year? How should fans feel if they go 4 wins, no wins in the conference?
I think still pretty defeated, but still that you have a lot of work to do. I think that would show that you need to do maybe a better job recruiting. Or maybe, I don't want to say a better job recruiting on Morris's part.
Chad Morris's guys in the door.
But Morris, here's where you need to really focus on. Here's where we really struggled. If that is the case and that's how it happens, I would, for Arkansas' sake, hope to think that that's not going to happen.
How do you see it playing out?
I think Arkansas...
Not exactly wins and losses, but just rough about.
On this side of the conference, I still see Arkansas being in last place. I still see Arkansas in last place. They may get 5 wins. They may get 6 wins. And they may be tied for last place. But I don't see them jumping too far. They still have, I think, too many question marks, too many holes to possibly be filled. And again, not enough depth when it comes down to it. Some of these teams at the top, like your Alabamas, your Auburns, your LSUs,
you're not going to chase them.
They have the depth, and that is why they stay at the top. I think Morris comes in. He's going to have to, on the recruiting side, really be able to add a lot of guys, a lot more guys, a lot of the 3, 4, 5-star recruits, bring them in so you have the depth.
To be a successful season in the eyes of Arkansas fans, and you can't tell anyone what to think, but this is how I would feel as an Arkansas fan. A successful season for me would be win the games you're supposed to win, all your non-conference ones. You pretty much set yourself up for that success by not having too many of those games where it's like, we're not going to play Power 5 teams. We're going to stay very close in the realm of where we can win those games. So 4-0 there, that's what you should be expecting. And then try to steal one SEC game. Yeah. And whether it's an Ole Miss, whether it's a Vanderbilt, whether it's a Mizzou on the road at the end of the year, try to just steal one of those games, because then if you think about it, you're sitting there going, all right, I know we still finished 1-7 in the conference, but we're now closer to bowl game eligibility because we're 5 wins. Now we can maybe, if we schedule our non-conference in our favor again, work a little bit more to better the team in recruiting and try to win more SEC games. We could then win 2, become bowl eligible. But I know 6-6 is not the end goal for Arkansas fans. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Razorback fans, what are you thinking about with your quarterback competition? Chad Morris coming in. What is your feeling about the season? I know with these early previews, it's kind of a very different feel than when we get to the Pac-12, which will be our last ones, which basically we're ready for football at that moment. But let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Let's move on, though, into our next team, kind of moving up the ranking ladder for the SEC West, and we're looking at the Ole Miss Rebels. And I think there's no better place to start with Ole Miss than the quarterback position, because no matter you're talking NFL, college, it is the most important position on the field. And last year, Ole Miss, I almost said SMU, Ole Miss. See, I got Chad Morris on the mind still from the Arkansas segment. But at Ole Miss last year, there was huge, I want to say, hype for Shea Patterson coming in, now at Michigan. But he comes in last year, is injured. Then comes in a guy that, if you're not an Ole Miss fan, probably knew little about, Jordan Ta'amu. And he kind of, I'm going to say, lit the Ole Miss world on fire.
He did.
Where winning the Egg Bowl, beating Mississippi State, which is always a big deal for Ole Miss Nation. But the big thing is, can he kind of jump off of where he was last year? Last year he ended with just over almost 1,700 passing yards. He had 1,682. He had 11 touchdowns compared to only 4 INTs, and also had 165 yards on the ground and 4 scores with his legs as well. So what I'm going to ask you, Brandon, is right off the bat, is how hyped should Ole Miss fans be for Jordan Ta'amu entering the 2018 season?
Very, very hyped.
I thought you were going to just go, very. Back to you, Ricky.
No, I think they should be really excited about this guy. I think that Jordan Ta'amu, he steps in the Arkansas game. That's when he steps in. He leads Ole Miss to a 5-2 record when he's in there.
Yep.
You already said all of his stats. And what that shows, he's a great dual threat guy. He's a guy who can do it all, who can really move the ball down the field, who can stretch the field, and he's going to be stretching that field to A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown last season had another remarkable year there at Ole Miss. He goes over 1,200 yards receiving, led the SEC, 11 touchdowns, and his performance in the Egg Bowl, 133 yards and a touchdown there. This is a guy who's looking to shatter records here at Ole Miss, and these two, if they can work in tandem, and I know there's more to the team than just 2 guys, but if they can have that connection going throughout the season, that's going to be something that they're going to want to hook up a number of different times. And I would love to see Jordan Ta'amu be able to have an entire season under his belt. He's able to go 5-2 from the Arkansas game on. I think that, and I'm not trying to say that Ole Miss is going to just jump up and be the number one team on this side of the conference, but they have a real opportunity to improve on their 6-6 record from last season and their 3-5 record within the conference. I think that they can do some good things this year. Matt Luke comes in. He's and he's the quote unquote new coach because he was the interim for last year.
Yeah,
and now he's staying on as the.
I was gonna say like last
the actual
segment,
coach. They take off the interim.
When you said last segment we were talking about Arkansas, and you said, "Oh, Ole Miss has a new coach." I kind of was like in my head, I'm like, all right, like I don't remember them getting a new coach, but that's because he's new.
Technically, he is new. You take off the interim title, and he's new. So he's working with fewer scholarships. He has no bowl game because of their sanctions. It's not going to be easy because they have a lot of problems defensively, or they had a lot of problems defensively. But if you straighten out that defense, watch out for an Ole Miss team to be kind of sneaky, scary good. I think that.
Sneaky, scary good?
Sneaky, scary good.
SSG, is that what we're calling them? Sneaky, scary good? Brandon Swanson, we're going to have it each week of the season. I'm going to ask you, for each week, you're going to have an SSG team of the week. Brandon, sneaky, scary good. Sneaky, scary. Yeah, I can't even say it. Sneaky, scary good team of the week. We're going to start that when the football season starts. But the defense was something I wanted to get into because to me, that's the biggest question with this team. But before we kind of flip and go full mode into defense, I wanted to ask one thing. And this is a guy that we've talked about before on the podcast, but it was back when it was the we were talking about Michigan and Shea Patterson maybe transferring and different guys that could flip. And one guy we mentioned was Matt Corral. And he was a guy that was originally committed to Florida, then flipped. He decommitted from Florida, committed to Ole Miss. And the thing I want to ask you is basically, if it were me, I would think that a guy like Jordan Ta'amu pretty much has the job in hand. With what you did last season, 5-2, same coach coming in, same guys that you're working around, it would be pretty hard for someone to come in and upset you. What do you think, though? Because this was a confusing move to me because I would have thought, and this was way back when Corral made the decision, I would have thought that it would be easier to upend Felipe Franks with their new coach coming in compared to upending, and I really mean take the starting job from Ta'amu with not a new coach coming in. What do you think of Matt Corral, and what does he shake up for this offense, if anything, this year? Or is it just going to be we're going to redshirt you this year, and it's going to be Ta'amu's job, and we shouldn't even worry about Matt Corral?
Well, here's the thing. Remember, I believe Jordan Ta'amu is a senior. Matt Corral's coming in as freshman, and he's a highly touted freshman. So in the spring, in the Grove Bowl, he went 6 for 16, 30-some yards, 36 yards, I believe it was, and he threw 2 interceptions. It doesn't mean anything. But
and you are right, Ta'amu is a senior.
But I think it also means, though, that he's a freshman. He's got plenty of time to be able to grow. You have Ta'amu in as your senior this year, who you're putting the ball in very capable hands with him. But then you've got Matt Corral for the rest of the next 3 years. And I think that is something that Ole Miss fans can be excited about, is that not only are you playing for the present, but you're looking forward to the future. And this is a team that eventually the sanctions will be done. You can go back to the postseason. You got to make it there first.
Yeah.
But that you've got a guy who can help you get there. I think that's going to be really good. So that's where I don't see that Matt's going to be pushing Ta'amu for the starting job this season in any means. But I think he's going to be there for now the long haul, which is a good thing. But again, with this team, and I know that you want to probably get to it, they're dealing with so many different things right now. And you mentioned it. You mentioned at the beginning with Shea Patterson leaving. They lost 6 players to transfer. They lost Shea Patterson, and they lost in that 4-star wide receiver Van Jefferson. those are two guys that you could have really used this season that would have been good. Again, Shea Patterson, he's good. He's coming off of an injury. Ta'amu,
we'll be talking about him in the future.
I like him because I think, again, you've got that dual dynamic quarterback who can throw the ball and really throw the ball down the field, and who's a guy that can also do it with his legs. That always excites me. That gets you excited as a fan. And another reason why we'll talk about him later, Jalen Hurts. But Ole Miss has so many things working against them and has had so many things working against them. They really do have an opportunity if they clean up their defense, which is just atrocious.
I want to get into that in a second.
They can compete.
Well, because I want to get into the defense, the only thing I will say about Matt Corral is how I would virtually want to see this season go if I was a Rebel fan is, knock on wood, Ta'amu does not get injured this year. And if you're an audio listener, no one's knocking at the door or anywhere you're at. I was knocking on the table there because it's wood. But how I would envision this season going for Matt Corral is they don't redshirt him at the beginning of the year, but hopefully a healthy Ta'amu keeps him on the bench. And I only say that because if Ta'amu got injured and it's like you're done for the rest of the year, all right, Corral's going in because this guy doesn't flip to sit on the bench and be a third string quarterback. He'll be a second stringer, if anything. But hopefully Ta'amu plays every game. Corral doesn't even need to play. And then at the end of the year, Ole Miss does what we see most football teams do in college, where it's like, hey, this kid didn't play his freshman year. Let's tag a red shirt on him because what was the point of using a year of eligibility if he never saw the field at all? So that's kind of the situation I might see for a Corral. If Ta'amu gets injured, it's a different story. If not, this will basically be a red shirt season for him. But when it comes to the defense, the main part I want to talk about is up front. Their front seven. And the reason why I want to talk about them is they were bad when it came to 2017.
Bad.
That was my best goat impression of saying bad because they were bad. They were, to me, the thing they need to improve the most is their rush defense because on average, opponents ran for an additional 73 yards per game than their average. So let's say it's like you're averaging 1 yard a game. All right, you then ran for 74 yards on Ole Miss. That is just basic math. There was no one in college football running for only 1 yard per game last year. But let me just run you through some of these totals and I'm going to go right down the list, where basically South Alabama, they averaged 97.3 rushing yards per game. They ran for 170 on Ole Miss. UT Martin averaged 136.7 yards per game. They ran for 219 on Ole Miss. Cal averaged about 225. They ran for 163. Alabama averaged just over 250 on the year. They ran for almost 400 with 365 in that game. Auburn 218. They ran for 326. Vandy 107. They ran for 188. LSU 207, they ran for 393. Arkansas 168, they ran for 260 in that game, and Arkansas won that game only by 1 point. Kentucky 161, they ran a 219 against Ole Miss. Louisiana, they ran a 183 on average, 228 against Ole Miss. Texas A&M 155, 119. That was the only opponent to not meet their average. They ran for only 119. And then Mississippi State, 251. They ran for 294 against Ole Miss. So therein lies the problem with me, the defense in general, but therein lies the problem for the Ole Miss defense, because the one thing that does is if a team is able to run the ball against you, that means they're able to, possession-wise, kind of make that go longer. Big, long possessions when you're running the ball. Throwing the ball, I'm getting huge yardage down the field, bing, bang, boom. When teams are able to rush consistently on you, that just makes those possessions longer means your defense is on the field more, makes your defense tired by the end of the game. You're not going to win many games if that's the case.
You are not. You are absolutely not. And with this defense giving up nearly 460 yards per game, they gave up nearly 3,000 rushing yards on the ground for the entire season and 29 touchdowns.
Yep.
So part of this is, just lack of talent. Part of it is the strategy and the scheme, and that comes down to coaching. So what Matt Luke has to do is he has to be putting in a scheme and putting a scheme in place that is going to be best for these players. And I think it's also one of the things where there were so many times where guys were just out of position. They weren't necessarily always beat. They just weren't in the right spot when they needed to be. That happened on numerous occasions last year with Ole Miss's defense. So this season, that cannot happen. There is a lot of optimism around this team this year. There's a lot of optimism. There's people talking they could have 9 wins. Yeah, if you look at just the offense. But then you bring in the defense, and I think that drops you down to probably 7. If you're going by the defense from last year, or even 6, which is what they were. They were 6-6. If this defense can clean itself up, and they can go back to fundamentals, being in the right place, and the spot that they're supposed to be in when they're supposed to be there, and making the tackles, and not letting guys get past them on easy routes, or because they missed a tackle, this team can be significantly better. But it really, Ricky, lies on the defense.
Well, and also the thing is, when it comes to the defense, I want to put more of an asterisk on it. Lies on the coaching staff because
it does.
Because Luke coming back this year, defensive coordinator Wesley McGriff coming back this year. McGriff because he was hired as the DC for a second stint at Ole Miss, December of 2016, was promoted to the associate head coach July of 2017. So he was promoted to the associate head coach before last season, and he's basically had, one season? Last year was his first season back, so we'll see if there's any improvement. But if there's no improvement on that defense, then I would expect the hot seat to at least get a little hot under Wesley McGriff, because I don't know if you remove the interim tag on Luke only to put him on a hot seat with the defense. But the defense, to me, is the linchpin when it comes to Ole Miss overall, because if the defense is bad, I don't care how good Jordan Ta'amu in this offense is, they're not going to be going anywhere because A, they're not going to be on the field, and B, their defense is going to be so tired by the end of the game that they ain't going to be able to stop a nosebleed.
Another thing that I think is going to be helpful and work actually in favor this year for Ole Miss is that there shouldn't be any distractions. Hugh Freeze is gone. All the baggage that he
just
brought
move on.
And that was going on during the season, that's all gone. And no, I'm not saying that it was a bug that only affected the defense and the offense was unscathed by it, but it's just not good for your team. It's not good for a football team, especially when it's aimed right at the head coach and everything that's going on. That can affect a player or players. So with that situation gone, taken care of, cleaned up, and out of Ole Miss, this team can go back to focusing on football, focusing on fundamentals, and getting back to what matters. That's going to be good for them. It's healthy for everybody. It's healthy for the locker room. And that's why I think this team can really clean up its act. While, yes, McGriff is going to certainly, already he's on the hot seat, because if they are doing the same and giving up the same numbers defensively that they did last year, he's gone. McGriff will be gone. He will not have a job at Ole Miss. But Ole Miss also will not have gotten to the expectation that a lot of people have for them and that I have for them, just because of the fact that they've got a very strong offense. But like you said, Ricky, if the defense cannot get off the field, the offense will never see it. So I think that's going to be the number one thing is how quickly. And again, it's kind of going back to what we talked about with Arkansas. Arkansas, 48% of the time they allowed teams to convert on third down. Ole Miss cannot let teams convert consistently on third down, especially via the run. I think that they need to very much clean up that run defense. The pass defense, I think they gave up about 214 yards per game. You can take that. You'd like that to go down a little bit, but that can be okay as long as you're limiting what teams are able to do on the ground against you.
Well, and I'm looking at the schedule right now. That's kind of like why I look like I'm like really deep in thought right now, because I look at the schedules and I'm trying to think, will this team finish, if we set the over-under at 6, will they have over 6 wins, under 6 wins? And right now, before I go through all this, I'm going to say under. We'll see what happens if I change my own mind at the end. But here's what I'm thinking while looking at last year's schedule to this year's schedule. When it comes to the non-conference games, virtually the same. Just like they beat South Alabama, UT Martin, and then Louisiana, they should do the same this year to Southern Illinois, Louisiana Monroe, and then I think and Kent State. That's the other one. Those three, they should win those just like they won the easy cupcake non-conference games last year. The big question is, last year their Power 5 opponent that they played out at conference was Cal. They lost that game. That was at Cal. This time they're going to start the season neutral location, which is basically an away game depending on where it's played. Like Alabama usually kind of keeps theirs close to Alabama, so it's basically like a home game. But that neutral site could technically be like a road game depending on where it is. And they got to play a pretty good Texas Tech team. I know we're going to look at them in about a few weeks, but they're a team losing their starting quarterback. However, they're a solidified team in the Big 12. So right now, maybe 3-1 again in non-conference. So you keep to form. Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, loss. Like, you're not winning those 4 games, even with the whole Jimbo Fisher taking over for Kevin Sumlin. I just don't see you winning any of those 4 games. Arkansas is winnable. Maybe you should have won it last year. You only lost that one by 1 point last year. Mississippi State, I'm sorry, I don't see them winning that one. I mean, it was close last year. We'll get to Mississippi State in a little bit. I expect them to take a little bit of a step in the better direction of just playing better. So right now, I think I'm going to have to side with Mississippi State. That brings in the question of the only opponent, or the one opponent I didn't mention was Vanderbilt. Can you blow them out again? But the only opponent you didn't play last year was Kentucky. This year it's South Carolina. So basically, if I'm going to do and going to be nice, 3-2, so 5. You go 3-1 in non-conference, 2 wins in the conference against Vandy and South Carolina, and boom, you're at 5 wins. You're under where you are, and you're not going to a bowl game because you only got 5 wins.
I see 7 or 8.
Okay.
I see 7 or 8 here. So Texas Tech, I'm actually going to count that as a win. Texas Tech, as good as their offenses have been, I think that we know, with it being a Big 12 team, their defense in Texas Tech has never been known for their defense.
Well, what Big 12 team has?
I'll be honest with you. I think that what we could see, and we've seen it before, is this could be a 64-61 game. Especially if the defense for Ole Miss is not quite up to par yet. We could see a very high-powered game into the 40s, 50s, or 60s, and I'm very serious about that.
I'll put my money that the defense looks better against against Mississippi State at the end of the season than it does against Texas Tech at the beginning of the season.
Certainly.
That's usually how it works,
Certainly.
Right?
But I think that Ole Miss could get Texas Tech at the beginning of the season. A little bit of a wild hair on that one, but I think they could do it. They beat SIU, so there's 2. Kent State 3, ULM 4, Arkansas 5. Even though it's on the road, I've got Arkansas 5. I've got South Carolina at 6, Vandy at 7, and possibly Mississippi State for 8.
So, one more time, just take me through the SEC wins.
So your SEC
Because I'm assuming
wins,
you have 4-0 in
Arkansas,
non-conference.
South Carolina, Vandy. So there's 3, and possibly Mississippi State. So 3 with a possible 4th.
Yeah, you know what? I could see that. I'll be completely honest. I don't remember in my 5 if I counted Arkansas, which that could be an easy win for Ole Miss. So, I mean, I'll still put Texas Tech as a loss, although that's one to where I don't know if it's going to be a loss, but like I could just see it going either way. So 3-1. I'm going to redo my math for everyone. Everyone's like, Ricky, you just did this. I'm redoing my math here. So
doing math.
Yeah, doing math. 3-1 with the out of conferences. Then I'll say Vanderbilt, South Carolina, 3-2, and then I'll say Arkansas is 1. So I'll go, depending on the Texas Tech game, how that goes, either 5-6 or 7-5. That's kind of my range. So Arkansas and Texas Tech are my 2 questions. Depending how those go, it could be 6, 7, or even 5 for Ole Miss. Anything you want to mention or that we didn't hit with Ole Miss before we move on into our next team, which is going to be Texas A&M?
There might be something, but I know the fans will let us know.
You guys let us know down below. What do you think about Ole Miss football heading into this season? Are we too low on them? Are we too high on them? Are we right smack dab in the middle, exactly where we should be on Ole Miss football? Let us know what you guys think down below in that comment section. Let's move on, though, into our next team, looking at the Texas A&M Aggies, College Station, and Jimbo Fisher taking over. We've already kind of looked at him already in a segment earlier this offseason, kind of expectations for Jimbo Fisher this year in College Station. But before we get into him, because I know we're going to talk about him in his first year, I actually have a quote for you, and I am getting this quote from the fan-cited Texas A&M site, GighamGazette.com, and they wrote an article. Jeff Shull is the guy's name. Wrote an article where in it he said, in a comprehensive review of the SEC by Lindy Sports, one SEC coach spoke anonymously about the hire, and this is of their Jimbo Fisher and also their defensive coach, Mike Elko.
It was more about Mike Elko.
And when he says that, he goes, here's the exact quote, "He knows what he can do, but I never thought Notre Dame played great defense. I watched the first half of A&M's spring game, and I thought the defense sucked." What do you think? What do you think about that, Coach? We don't know who said it, but that means somebody in the SEC, one of the coaches in the SEC, isn't thinking too highly of Texas A&M's defense coming into this year based off their spring game.
Again, that's spring ball. I think that what you see in the spring, yes, there's some things that we can go off of, and there's some things that we can also be extremely troubled about and go, oh, that doesn't look good. But at the same time, it's a new coach. They're learning a new scheme, and I know that it's going to take some time, both on the offensive and defensive sides, and culture. How many times do we talk about culture? You're trying to bring in a new culture and instill something new amongst these players.
Get them to buy in and believe.
Yes. I mean, I think the theme before, like when they'd leave the tunnel, it was 8-8 is great. But I
like
think
that one.
I think
That's
that
Kevin Sutherland.
I think that what they're going to see now is a lot more practices that we're going to work harder. We're going to have to be bigger, faster, stronger, and that's going to come from working hard. And Jimbo Fisher, he only knows winning. So for a coach that only knows winning, he's going to bring in, I think, a winning mindset, hopefully, that will sweep across these players. So to get to that point again, to the point that you asked, and I went about it a long way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if this one person thought they sucked in spring ball.
Well, here's the thing I want to kind of bring into it, though, is not necessarily, like, it doesn't matter that this one person thought, like, or this one coach, I should say, thought they sucked, but the The one thing that, I mean, I think he made an okay point. I'm going to say okay, and I'm kind of being nice maybe, is when he said he knows what he can do, but I never thought Notre Dame played great defense. To me...
He's talking about 2016, he ain't wrong.
To me, that is what we can kind of take from. Not necessarily the spring game because, all right, he's coming in, this is the first time this coaching staff is kind of working with these kids, working with these college players, but I think that's a good point. Was Notre Dame defensively a great, stout defensively, like a defense team? Not necessarily, but the thing with Notre Dame was that more of Brian Kelly and everything going on with him as the head coach and not necessarily Mike Elko. So I'll ask you, we'll start defense. I know we usually like to start offense, but I'll ask you starting defense, what do you expect from the Texas A&M defense this year in 2018?
I think that what they'll do, while there are questions, I think Mike Elko will be able to help them. He took a Notre Dame defense that was, let's be honest, god-awful in 2016. I mean, you couldn't stop Duke. That was bad. And you were, I'm just remembering the game that I went to in 2016 that they played against Duke. It was at home. Notre Dame was winning. Duke gets back into it was just bad. It was just bad. But to this past year, take them to be the 46th ranked defense in the country. Now, people would still hear, well, 46. Well, you're not in the top 5? That's not very good. No, it's a lot better because they were, I mean, if someone would have told me that Notre Dame's defense in 2016 was dead last, I would have probably believed them. That's how bad they were. So to bring them back to be at 46, I think that in 2017 is big. So bringing in Mike Elko is only going to help your squad. I think that if they, again, this is another one where if you bring in a little bit more depth, if you add some depth to that defense, I think you're going to feel a little bit more comfortable. But right now, having the defensive coordinator in place that you do is already going to be a big help for them.
Well, and for me, you mentioned depth, and for me, the one position that I look at on this defense, defensive end. They don't have much depth at the defensive end. Pretty much it's, we've got Landis Durham, who's our senior end, and then it's like, all right, what else do we have on that pass rusher from the end? Because he had 10.5 sacks last year. So I wonder what Elko will be able to do with this kind of the top guys. So like the Landis Durhams, the Tyrell Dotsons, the Derek Tuckers. What is he able to do with them? And can he find a way to use schemes to overcome the depth problems that this team might have? Because the one thing I didn't mention, this is the last thing I'll mention from that Fanside article by Jeff Shull, is he kind of said the same thing that you said, where he said, and I quote, "It's not fair to judge Elko's defense in a spring game in his first year as the coordinator. He's not going to go all out with schemes. He's not game planning to stop one offense. If you want to criticize his defense in previous stops, fine, but the stats wouldn't back up the claim, and that's really all that matters." So for me, it really comes down to, with the defense though, like I said, what can he get from those top guys? And with schemes and game plans, can he find a way to mask that depth, and where we look at it and go, oh, we said that'd be a huge problem this year, and I guess it didn't really matter. So it all depends on if he's able to do that in 2018.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing is that, yeah, the depth really isn't there for them. But if you look at a lot of the starting positions, like you said, with
they've got their guys solidified.
Yeah, like you said, with Landis Durham, I think you've got a really good guy there. Tyrell Dodson, Derek Tucker at the safety position. Both of them are expected to be guys on the rise who will be able to come into their own in those positions and really be able to make some plays. There are some questions at certain parts of the secondary, like at cornerback and things like that, but there is talent on the defensive side of this roster. It's thin once you go past the starters, but there is talent at those starting positions. So it's one of those where you just hope that guys can stay healthy, and you believe that if they can, you're able to make a run.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think that Ole Miss, where we were just talking about, where Texas A&M
With these previews,
is right now.
sometimes it's hard to disassociate that last team from your head. Hell, I even did it in the Ole Miss one where I was talking about Arkansas stuff and we were in the Ole Miss segment. But yeah, and the other thing too is with Jimbo, because Jimbo Fisher coming in, he's an offensive guy. So he's not going to be a guy that at Florida State, his defenses were no joke. They were never elite in my mind. Really, the thing that we remember back to is the offenses and pretty much the quarterbacks for Jimbo Fisher. So he's going to need a guy like Elko to come in and kind of be that defensive mind while Jimbo Fisher worries about the offense. What do you think about the offense for Texas A&M coming into this year?
I just want to say again really quickly that Texas A&M last season allowed at least 35 points in 6 games last year.
Well, that's a cap.
35 points in 6 games.
Is that going to change just because of the coaching staff, though? Was that a Kevin Sumlin thing? And not necessarily going to be a Jimbo Fisher thing?
But what I wanted to say is that, again, I want to make the comparison to Notre Dame because that's where Elko's coming from.
Yep.
2016 was a horrid defensive year for them. They had a different coordinator, but then Elko comes in 17, turns it around. Elko's now coming over here in 18 for a team that struggled defensively at times, could turn it around. So I think that he's got his work cut out for him, but I think that you can be really optimistic that you have the right guy to be able to turn that situation around. But yes, now to move over to the offensive side, what I think is going to be interesting here is a lot of people are going to expect a lot of really big things from Texas A&M already in year one because of the Jimbo Fisher effect. They're going to expect, we gave you 10 years and $75 million. You better be winning 9 games year one. I think that's an unrealistic expectation. And I'm not saying that they couldn't win 9 games, but to think just because you got a guy who's getting paid 10 years and $75 million and he really never had a bad year at Florida State until last season, I still don't think that you can put that on a guy. I don't think that you can do that. Also, especially because he's going to be bringing in his own scheme, as almost every new head coach is going to do. And he's bringing in a pro-style scheme. He's bringing in a very up-tempo type of scheme. And what is it that we talked about last week, Ricky? It's that for Willie Taggart, his game plan at Florida State is much more simple. Whereas with Jimbo Fisher,
a little bit more complex.
It's complex. There's a lot in this playbook. So who's going to pick up the playbook the quickest, the fastest? And that's going to take us to our quarterback competition between Nick Starkel and Kellen Mond. And I think that the winner of this quarterback competition is going to be the guy that's able to grasp the playbook the fastest and who's going to understand it the best. And Starkel, he ends the season. He ended up with over 1,400 yards, 11 TDs in his last 4 games. Kellen Mond also had some good moments throughout the year as well, and he's the guy who's going to be a better runner. So Jimbo Fisher has been a guy who knows how to work with quarterbacks. Jameis Winston, great quarterback. Great quarterback over at Florida State. And DeAndre Francois, really good quarterback in his freshman season at Florida State as well under Jimbo Fisher. So what fans can be, I think, excited and hopeful about is that whoever ends up being the starting quarterback in this system for Jimbo Fisher is going to be a good quarterback, is going to understand the playbook, is going to know the playbook, and they can feel like Jimbo Fisher picked this guy. All right, that's the right guy.
Well, and the thing that I look at, and I'm kind of pulling up an article here, is both of them, this isn't really going to answer anything when it comes to the position battle, which you're looking at our logo right now. I looked up, the camera has died on us, Brandon, so we're basically audio for the whole rest of this segment for sure. And the thing that I look at with both these guys, Nick Starkel first, is that when they were talking about the coaching staff, this was from late May, Starkel says, I love Coach Fisher. He's brought a whole new intensity here, a whole new mindset. Whereas you've got Mod, who came in, and he said, if we do something wrong, he's on us. If we do something right, he's on us. Because there's a better way to do stuff. He's trying to hold us accountable, trying to depend on us to lead the whole entire offense, the whole entire team. So it looks like from these two comments, Jimbo Fisher being very hands-on with these guys is only benefiting. And that's what Jimbo Fisher wants. Jimbo Fisher wants his quarterback. And the thing I look to is basically what Mod said, is he wants us not to just lead the entire offense, but lead the entire team. The thing I want to go back to is, now, I might have hated him in college. I might not be his biggest fan, but Jameis Winston, who was a Jimbo Fisher quarterback. The one thing you cannot say about Jameis Winston is you cannot say, oh, that guy does not know how to fire up a football team. He does not know how to be a leader in the locker room. You can't say that because he can. You can hate him for every off-the-field issue and problem he had in college. You can hate him for how he's not winning with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now if you're a Buccaneer fan. But the thing you cannot hate him for is his leadership in the locker room. And that's what Jimbo Fisher wants. And to me, the one that's going to win this job, and that's why I can't say for sure if it's going to be Starkel, if it's going to be Mod, is which one of these guys takes command of the locker room? Which one of these guys is the leader on the field, leader in the locker room? Because that plus the talent is going to help Jimbo Fisher say, that's my guy.
I think you're right. And I think it's also going to be who gels better with these receivers that they have as well. And these receivers, they're looking for some big plays, and they have some big threats here at receivers. They've got Jamon Osborne, who had 50 catches last season. He averaged about 11.4 yards per catch. Kind of, what's his ceiling? I don't think he's even hit that yet. He could possibly, let's see, even go to 14 yards a catch, 15 yards a catch this next year. Cameron Buckley, they're looking at him as possibly a new deep threat as well. And then Jalen Preston, a 4-star receiver that was very, very coveted in the Texas area, goes to Texas A&M. So they have some weapons there. And I think it's also, like I mentioned, going to be not only who understands the playbook the best, who has the best tools, who's the best leader, but who also gels the best with this group of wide receivers. Well,
and the thing I also think, too, is just overall with this offense is this team has a really good, if I'm a Texas A&M fan, I should be optimistic for this year. I know you mentioned earlier that you don't want expectations to be too high just because you have Jimbo Fisher, but I'm kind of looking at the schedule already, and to me, the thing I want to ask you is Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher being a little bit too ambitious by scheduling Clemson second game of the year, 7 o'clock Eastern time, ESPN game? Are they being too ambitious by Jimbo Fisher first year, boom, we want Clemson, who was a college football playoff team, who's a national championship team under Dabo Swinney.
Was that Jimbo Fisher who scheduled that game, or was that already scheduled on the?
I don't know if that was already scheduled.
Put on the schedule.
I don't know if it was already scheduled.
I think that they schedule these games a couple of years in advance.
It's weird though because they have that scheduled, but then the next week, which is week 15 or September 15th, it says to be determined. They don't have an opponent that week. They still got to find someone for that game. So I don't know if it was Jimbo. I don't know if it was before Jimbo. But the thing is, whether it was with Jimbo, whether it's not, I think the question can still be asked then, is that too ambitious for this team to go after Clemson, either if it was after Jimbo and just because you have Jimbo, or if it was before Jimbo and you didn't even know you were going to have him as your head coach?
So that's why I'm not going to answer the question of is it too ambitious, but
or what can we expect from that
Is Texas A&M going to be ready right away week 2 to face what has been a pretty consistent, talented team in Clemson. Now, last season, Clemson was not what they had been because I think that they certainly felt the loss of not having Deshaun Watson. But even still, they were competitive.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be, I think, a much more competitive Texas A&M team with Jimbo Fisher there leading the guys at the helm. A defense that I think has guys already in place, but will get better with Elko there. An offense that I think is ready to possibly explode in a good way. But will they be ready? I looked at a preview of that game, and I'm not sure if it was on Athlon Sports or Fansided, but the preview, it goes through and it says everything, but I was more interested to who they had winning the game. They had Clemson with 20 points. They had Texas A&M with 23 winning the game.
I just don't
Week
see
2
it.
against Clemson. I saw that score and my jaw dropped, and I'm like, wow, is Texas A&M going to be ready by then? But we have to remember, they have a pretty good offense. Defensively, that's the question. Do the guys step up and make the plays they should be making in the starter positions? I think they can. I think Elko has them ready at that point. I think it will be a close game. I don't think we see a blowout from either side. I think we do see a close game like that. It could be a 23-20. I would flip a coin at this point as to who wins it.
Well, and the thing I'm kind of going in my head right now is, so bear with me a little bit. So 2-4. All right, that's going to be 3-4. And I think I got one more left here to kind of figure out. All right, 4-4, I think, is what I'm looking at. So the thing also for that game, and this is why, first off, I think that's far off. I don't think it's going to be A, that close, B, wrong person winning. I think Clemson's going to dominate in that game. And the only reason why I say that is, yeah, it was a different Clemson team with Kelly Bryant and not Deshaun Watson. That defense is good in Clemson. And this year, they've got, like, you looked at Todd McShay's way too early mock draft. A ton of guys littered in that mock draft from their defense. That this Clemson defense is going to come ready to play this year. Another thing I look at that game, these coaches know each other. I know that we're not going to talk about, was it scheduled before or after Jimbo? Point is, Jimbo's there now. And Jimbo Dabo have played each other 8 times since 2010. That was Jimbo Fisher's first year at Florida State, whereas Dabo had been at Clemson for 2 years prior. They are an equal 4-4 against each other, and the last 3 or 4 years, Dabo Swinney has gotten the upper edge. Now, the big 4 wins for Jimbo Fisher came when he had Jameis Winston as his starting quarterback, and when they were going national title hunting. Same thing for Dabo Swinney with Deshaun Watson. So that's the thing that I think makes that game important as well, taking the two teams out of it. Those coaches know each other. They know what they're going to want to do, and they're going to kind of, Dabo's going to be able to know what Jimbo's going to do before he does it. Same thing for Jimbo and Dabo. So I kind of look at that game on the schedule, and I just think if they scheduled that after Jimbo or even before Jimbo, I feel like it's being a bit too ambitious for Texas A&M, because if it was before you had Jimbo, you have no reason in my mind scheduling that game because of what you have been under Kevin Sumlin. I know you scheduled Josh Rosen and UCLA last year, but spoiler alert, Clemson is not Josh Rosen and UCLA of last year, and you lost that game after leading for most of it. So, I mean, that's the one thing I look at, but when I look at the rest of their schedule, they're primed to have another good year. I feel like for me, the biggest question is, first off, this isn't a question, this is just a fact. You don't have to play Florida this year, so that's good. You don't have to play Florida, who was a close game last year, and really your biggest games are the ones that it is every year. What do you do at Alabama? What do you do at Auburn? What do you do at Mississippi State? What do you do at home against LSU? The bad thing against those, I'm sorry, the Alabama teams you're probably losing because you have to go into Alabama and into Auburn. But then Mississippi State is also a road game. So for me, it comes down to what are you going to do against those top 4 in your division of Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, and LSU.
I'd be really interested to know who the TBD is going to be in week 3.
We'll know
for
when
them.
they schedule it.
That will be very interesting because right now I think I've got them in at about 7 wins or so. It could possibly be an 8th with them. But one of the other things I wanted to mention.
Can I ask you something real quick?
Sure.
I want to put you into the shoes of Jimbo Fisher. You have now the role of scheduling that game. Do you go for a Power 5? Do you go for a non-Power 5? Or do you go for the easiest opponent you could play?
The Citadel. Slotting them in. And if
Or
they're not available,
Chattanooga?
I'm going Mercer.
Oh, okay. No Chattanooga?
No, I'm kidding. You know what? I think that if you can slot someone in here.
Those two are some classic SEC
Oh, they are.
non-conference games.
Oh, they are.
Especially for Alabama.
Alabama's playing the Citadel this year. So
Played Mercer last year.
Yeah, I know. It's just, who do we want to beat this season? I think, though, for Texas A&M, you just played Clemson. You have Alabama the week after. Maybe you go with a mid-major. There in the middle where maybe they already scheduled and it's just not on here, but I would assume that they haven't yet. So if they still haven't, you try and go for somebody in the middle. Someone in the middle where hopefully, you'll beat them, but they're still a quality opponent.
And I wonder if that game obviously wasn't scheduled when Jimbo Fisher came in, but if Jimbo's like, you know what, let me sit on it a little bit, because you look at the 2 games you mentioned on the outside, do we really want to kind of work ourselves out where we are playing Clemson, another tough team? Oh, we do have it. I do have it. I looked up at 12thman.com. We do have that opponent. Someone's probably already shouted at us in the comment section. You want to know who it's going to be? We've mentioned them before on a podcast or on a team this week, Louisiana Monroe. So it'll be Clemson, Louisiana Monroe, and then Alabama.
So they went for the easy one. I get it.
It's going to be home at College Station, Kyle Field.
That makes sense. So you put another win there, and I think I've got 8.
All right.
For them right now, but this is a team where, again, I think that there is really great upside, but they need to fit. One of the things I wanted to mention was that they need to figure some things out with the offensive line. Outside of the center position, I think right tackle, everything else is kind of up for grabs. And they don't have necessarily a solid offensive line. So there's been injuries, there's been inconsistencies, and that always is going to play into what your quarterback's able to do behind center, what your running back's able to do. And it's probably going to be junior running back Travion Williams who will be leaned on this season. Can you open up holes for him to be able to run and create space and everything like that too? So while I think Texas A&M has a lot of promise, especially with the new head coach, the new scheme, and a new feel about them, there's still things that need to be improved upon.
Yeah, I mean, just going through the schedule, really, for me, I'm going to go with 6 wins. You get a bowl game, 7 wins, another 7-6 season, and it's mainly because you'll go 3-1 in non-conference, then you'll beat Kentucky, South Carolina, Old Miss. That'll put you at 6. Then your 7th will be your bowl game. The big thing for me, Alabama, Mississippi State, Auburn, LSU. What do you do in those 4 games? Do you steal one from any of those? I don't see it. Any final thoughts before we move on into Mississippi State?
No, sir.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think down below in the comment section about Jimbo coming in. You can check out. We kind of didn't talk about really the expectations in this one because it's going to be popping up for you guys on your screen. We kind of looked at that already for Jimbo Fisher and his expectations, but let us know what you guys think about Texas A&M down below in the comment section. Let's continue on, though, Brandon, into our next team. Looking at, this is the team that I have been the most high on, and we haven't even talked about them yet. And it is the Mississippi State Bulldogs, because I mentioned in the Arkansas part where I might be a little bit higher on Mississippi State this year. To me, this is going to be a very important year for the Bulldogs. They are returning their quarterback in Nick Fitzgerald. The big question for me, though, I want to start offense. So they bring in Nick Fitzgerald still, who is still at quarterback. To me, though, the question is, when it comes to not just him but the offense, is can the wide receiver group around him step up?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So last year, Nick Fitzgerald, who I love Nick Fitzgerald. I love his game. I love how he plays. And
should have beat Alabama.
Yeah, he should have. He definitely should have. He had the opportunity.
Close.
But so last year, his numbers, 15 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and he wasn't all that accurate. The year before, when he had Fred Ross to throw to and someone he felt comfortable with, his numbers were 21 TDs to 10 interceptions. That's a big difference for how your season ends. And I know he had an injury, and he's over that now, and he's healthy, and he's looking good and getting back to form. You are completely right on the wide receiver end of things. If they don't have a guy who can step up and take the role of the number one guy, the number one go-to guy for Nick Fitzgerald, we may see numbers similar to 15 TDs compared to 11 interceptions. And what I also think is going to be interesting, though, too, is that their new coach, former Penn State offensive coordinator Joe Moorhead, this is his first gig as a head coach in the Power 5. So Eris Williams, tough, reliable running back, who's a 1,000-yard rusher. Look for him to get really involved in the passing game. Want to know why?
Why?
Because who was getting involved in the passing game over at Penn State was Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that now Eris Williams is going to have the same type of numbers on the receiving end that Saquon Barkley did, but I think that Saquon Barkley had, 54 receptions or something like that out of the backfield.
He was also Saquon Barkley.
I get it, but
I'm just saying.
But there I go again. Mississippi State's running backs, I think, had a combined 21 or 31 receptions total. So look for that to be another option for Nick Fitzgerald out of the backfield. I'm not saying that, because he'll catch more passes, that's going to save everything. But look for that to be another option, another safety valve possibly for him when he might be in trouble.
Well, and some of the guys that I am looking at to kind of help out the receiving game for Nick Fitzgerald and this offense are, first off, two guys that they're getting back from injury. The first one is Keith Mixon. The other one is Malik Deer. Expect those guys to come back and really give a shot in the arm to Nick Fitzgerald. The other one, and I'm going to say this last name wrong, but just warning out there for MSU fans, is JUCO transfer wide receiver Stephen Guidry. I think that's how you say it, or Guidry, because it's G-U-I. Guidry, however you say it. I expect those three, Mixon, Deer, and then Stephen, I'll just say his first name, those guys to kind of play up, because two are returning, coming back from that injury, and then you're adding a JUCO transfer, which most of the time you're expecting those JUCO guys to contribute more so than a freshman being recruited out of high school.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right on there, and getting guys back from injury is huge. Using your tight ends, Johnson and Green, having them as reliable options, that's all going to be very, very important. And it's just the consistency. It's hoping that guys can stay healthy. It's developing a rapport with different guys on the roster, in the receiving core. If you can develop the rapport, which Nick Fitzgerald has shown, again, you go back to 2 years, 21 touchdowns to the 10 interceptions. If he can build a rapport with these guys, he'll have success. And what's going to be interesting in Joe Moorhead's scheme is this rapport between quarterback and wide receiver is going to be more important, I think, than ever before, because Nick Fitzgerald may not be running as much because he's going to be expected to spread the field,
which may not be bad
the ball
for him.
down the field through the air.
Well, and I say that it might not be that bad for Fitzgerald because you think about it. I think he got the injury in the Egg Bowl against Ole Miss, but he injured his ankle. So, I mean, there's that thing of like, oh, you don't want me to be as mobile. That might be good because hopefully then I don't re-injure that ankle in any way. The other thing, like looking over other side of the ball, the thing that I don't want to say it concerns me, but I'll ask you about, does it concern you that, so they've got Bob Shoop coming in. He is Mississippi State's 5th defensive coordinator in as many years, and this is now his 3rd different SEC school. To me, that's not a good thing when you say, oh, this is our 5th of anything in that many years.
No, that's never good. That's never good. And also it's not good because last year they played in the 3-4 defense and they executed it well. So what Shoop is bringing is he's bringing the 4-3 defense. And it's going to be that question of, they did so well in the 3-4 and so well that they were top 5 in sacks, tackles for a loss, and turnovers created. Are you going to see those numbers go down? Are you going to see their position where they were in top-ranked defenses go down because they're flipping to the 4-3? But in spring practice, they look pretty good in the 4-3. It'll be interesting to see how they look when they get out against an opponent and an opposing team as opposed to them going against each other. That's going to be the interesting thing, especially when you're in an actual game scenario. Is the 4-3 going to hold up, or are people going to be going, well, you had the 3-4 and it worked just fine, and it had us here. Now we're not as good as what we were in the 4-3. What's going on? So that you don't want to have that question mark.
Well,
but so far it looks like it's working.
The thing that I kind of say about that is 3-4 to 4-3, the big difference for me is basically it's where do you want that extra defender?
Yeah.
Do you want it in your linebacking core? Do you want it in your offensive line? And to me, it might be beneficial to have that 4 defensive linemen up front because, now you don't get the 2 ends and then 2 outside linebackers to rush the passer. It's just the 2 outside linebackers, and you only have that 1 inside linebacker now. I don't think that is going to be like the linchpin that keeps them because they have talent all over the defensive ball.
They do.
And the one that I really like, because I'm assuming we're going to be talking about him later this year and into 2019 for the 2019 NFL draft, is Montez Sweat, where he's a guy, double-digit sack guy, this is a guy that if you're getting double-digit sacks in the SEC, the NFL is going to come a-knocking, and they are going to be scouting your games. They also have, on the other side, I believe they have Jeffrey Simmons, who is going to be huge for that. Or he's actually in the nose tackle, defensive tackle spot. So you're going to have both of those guys right next to each other. That is going to help moving to the 4-3, because if they were in the 3-4, then it's all right, Simmons, you're all alone in the middle. You kind of got to man your own, where it's like, all right, now we're in the 4-3. You can have Sweat on one side where he's trying to go around, get to the outside, and then Thomas and Simmons, Corey Thomas and Jeffrey Simmons, can kind of work that middle to get maybe a pass rush push at sometimes, but also provide a better front against running backs, because you got to think about it. Some of the teams they're going against in this side of the SEC, LSU has been known for running backs. Auburn has had their fair share of running backs, Kerryon Johnson last year, and we all know, we don't have to talk about Alabama and their stable of running backs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is going to be a defense that most likely is going to be similar to last year. And if it is similar, anywhere near what they were last season, they're going to have another strong defense. And this is, I think, the first team that we've talked about in our previews of the SEC that we haven't said there is a real question on defense. Or I should take that back. Texas A&M, they have the pieces there, but there still are some questions in terms of depth. Mississippi State, I think, looks a lot better in terms of those things. This is a defense that, again, from last year, they were really strong. I look for them to be strong again, even though they do change their scheme and their coordinator again. You'd like to believe that now they can have a guy that stays there for a little bit, sees this through for a couple of seasons or multiple seasons, because keeping that consistency would be great for this program. And a lot of people, as you are in there, I'm in there as well, think this team could be a pretty good team this year.
You know, it's actually really funny looking at their schedule. September 29th, guess who they welcome back into Starksville? Dan Mullen. They're going to be playing Florida. And the thing I was going to ask you is, because I look at the Athlon Sports preview, and at the end they kind of give their final analysis, and the last sentence says this: 8 wins are expected, and some believe that this could be a 10-win team with the right breaks. Over under 8. Is that too high of an expectation for a team that, yes, you still have Nick Fitzgerald coming back, but you have questions at wide receiver. You have a new defensive coordinator, the 5th in as many years. And on top of it, you don't have your guy in Dan Mullen that you've had for 9 seasons in Starkville. And now you're bringing in a guy like Moorhead, which you said, first Power 5 job. With all of that we have talked about, do you look at 8 wins and go, that might be a little bit too much? 10, you're getting in that crazy territory.
I look at their schedule and think they could do 9 again. I look at their schedule and I think they could do 9 again. And they could, if everything goes really well for this team, push for 10. I do. I mean, if you want to get into the schedule here,
go ahead, hit me.
You look at their first game against SFA. I think that's a win. You go on the road against K-State. I think that's a win. The third week number 3, that's another win. 4th game, so there's 3. Then you're playing Kentucky on the road. There's 4 wins. To start things off. Florida comes in.
And I'm right in with you. 4-0 to start.
And I think Florida comes in, and if this defense for Mississippi State is where they'd like it to be, and Florida's quarterback situation is still a little shaky, even with Felipe Franks, I think Mississippi State could take this one from the Gators, and it could be a win. They could start off 5-0.
And I feel like that game, the Florida game, will be a turning point for them. Because if they lose, I feel like the rest of the season will carry some momentum with that. But the reason why right now, as we sit here, this could change when we make our picks before that week, I feel like Mississippi State would win that game is because the moons and the planets all align right now for that to be a Bulldog win. Not only is it at home, not only do you have your former coach coming in, it's a home game, which I feel like that game is going to be very emotional for those Bulldog players. Basically, I wouldn't be surprised if some feel like you left us. Why did you have to leave us for them? Kind of a thing. And although there will be like, man, it's great to see Coach Mullen again, do not get anything twisted. Those players are going to have one thing in mind, and I want to beat you. I want to beat my former coach. Basically, it's almost like, it's not as bad, but it's almost like a breakup. You break up with a girl, Brandon, the one thing you want to do in the end is win the breakup. I now have to, not right away, but I have to now find that next person and make that person better than the next person they find, because I need to win the breakup. That's what
is that how that goes?
That's what this. Yeah, it is. I'll be honest. I've fallen into that before, where it's like down the line dating someone. It's like, oh, I'm a lot better than that guy. I am winning the breakup. But that's what this game will be. This game will be. We need to win this game to win the breakup for Mississippi State. And if they win that game, which right now I will say they do that because the emotion coming in, it being at home, their fans feeding into that and giving them that little support at home, they're going to start 5-0. Then it could get a little shaky where Auburn beats you, LSU beats you, then another linchpin game to the season, Texas A&M. Depending on what they do there, this is their second turning point of the season. Do they continue a downward trend or do they turn things around? I don't know what they're going to do in this one because I like Texas A&M this year. I also like Mississippi State. I think they'll beat Louisiana Tech. Then they will lose to Alabama.
Close game, though.
And then, what, close game against Louisiana Tech or Alabama?
You can. Is that a question? Is that a real question?
Yeah, kind of.
So you're on the road at Alabama, and I know that's even more difficult, but this game was so close last year. I think it could be close again.
But
I think it could be close again.
I still think it's a loss, and then you beat Arkansas, beat Ole Miss. So 5-0 to start. Then Louisiana Tech, Arkansas, Ole Miss. That's 8 wins right there. That is 8 wins, and then boom. So I'll say 8 or 9. 8 or 9 wins on the year. I don't think they get to 10 because if they want to get to 10, they need to beat Auburn, LSU, or Alabama. They need to beat one of them. I don't know if they will because Alabama's on the road, LSU's on the road, and Auburn is a really good team, although that game is at home.
I think I'm going to give them 9.
All right.
I think I'm going to give them 9 here early. Preseason, looking at it, I'm going to give them 9. I feel good about this Mississippi State team. I think that they have a lot of things working in their favor. Again, if Nick Fitzgerald stays healthy, if he, I think, is able to, I don't want to say grasp the offense, but change things a little bit as the offense is changing. He's being asked to, maybe a little less running, a little bit more throwing, continue to be accurate, or hopefully get back to being accurate. And then, of course, being able to have that rapport with his wide receivers. I think if he's able to do that, the defense stays similar to what they were last season. We're looking at a pretty strong Mississippi State team.
I will say this, though. If there's any of the top 3, the Auburn, Alabama, LSU, that Mississippi State could beat, it's LSU. And the thing that I wonder, and I'll ask you, is if you had to put money on it, because now you can because sports betting is legal. If you had to put money on it, how confident would you feel at this point putting money on the fact that Mississippi State would end up with a better record and end with a higher standing than LSU at the end of the year? So let's just say Alabama and Auburn are 1-2. Who would you put your money on more so to get that third spot? LSU, who we're going to talk about next, or Mississippi State?
I'm not sure. I think I may have to go with Mississippi State right now, only because at LSU they're changing a little bit offensively.
They have a quarterback question.
They've got a quarterback question. They've got a running back question. They've got some questions there on the offensive side, which we'll get to. But that's why Mississippi State, I would probably put them right now ahead of LSU.
Right now, I'm going to put LSU with the win to that game. However, I could see me and that outcome being different when we actually get to that week.
I thought you were talking about who ends up better. I wasn't talking about the game.
For me, they both come hand in hand.
Oh, they don't for me.
They do for me because, for me, 9 wins, that LSU one gives you 10 wins. And I think it could be another thing like we saw last year where both of them finished 9-4, but whether you're going to finish with 3 losses or 2 losses is going to be the difference between those two teams because one's going to finish with 2, the other's going to finish with 3, and whoever finishes with that 3 will be the team that lost to the other one during the regular season. Anything you think we didn't mention before we move on into the LSU Tigres?
No, sirree.
This is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think down below in the comment section about Mississippi State Nick Fitzgerald coming back, but so many questions in that coaching staff. Is 8 wins too high? Is 10 wins too high? What do you guys think down below in that comment section? Let's move on, though, into that LSU team, though, Brandon. And when it comes to LSU, just getting right into it, the first thing I asked you while we were in between segments was basically, where do you want to start with this one? Because they have a quarterback question, there's the running back question, they have a new offensive coordinator, and I think offense is where we're going to start as usual for us most of the time on these team previews. And as you had mentioned before we hit the record button, was basically Matt Canada coming in as offensive coordinator, another new offensive coordinator for this team under Ed Orgeron. What do you think happens with this team under Matt Canada? And more importantly, what's going to go on in your mind with the running back question for them? Because usually they've had an answer. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was Leonard Fournette. Then last year, 2 years ago, it was Darius Geis. Is Matt Canada going to be able to find that next Fournette, not Leonard Fournette, their next Fournette, their next Geis in this group of running backs that they have?
Well, Ricky, actually they are moving from Matt Canada to Steve Ensminger. Canada was last year,
That's right.
And I know it can be confusing because
Very
they've
confusing.
had 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years.
And Canada's with Maryland now, that's correct.
So they moved from Matt Canada, they go to Steve Ensminger. Orgeron wants a more pro-style attack.
You know what I was thinking, too?
What were you thinking,
You
too?
should have just cut me off, man. You should have just cut me off. You let me say Matt Canada's name too many times, but go on.
I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to be too rude. So they're looking to go a little bit no huddle, spread the field, 3 to 4 wide receivers on the field every
Much
time.
like we see from more college programs now.
Yes. So, like you said, they're getting away from what we've seen in the last couple of years. Honestly, it goes all the way back to 2013. The Tigers have had proven running backs that they could have win games for them since 2013. And now they've got a number of different guys out there who we're not quite sure yet if someone's going to shoulder the load, if they're going to share the load, but they've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they've got Nick Brossette. Nick Brossette is the bigger build guy, could possibly carry 20 times a game. Then you've got 4-star true freshman Chris Curry, who's coming in as well. This is going to be something and a question that I'm not sure if they have answered by the time we get into the fall. And I don't know if they end up going with one guy, because of all the guys there, they don't have that feel yet. And I don't believe that LSU has that feel yet with any of them, that you have a Leonard Fournette or that you have a Darius Geis. They don't have that same feeling that those guys had where they were there, they're the starter. They're leaning on them for the entire game. I think it's also going to be interesting at the quarterback position. We're not going to really touch too much on that because we already talked about Joe Burrow as the guy who we think is going to be the man here, coming from Ohio State, transferring and being at that program. He's only thrown the ball like 39 times, but being able to be in an Urban Meyer system behind JT Barrett and good quarterbacks there. It's going to be really interesting how this system works. Because as I've said, and I'll say it again because I love saying it so much, I just couldn't stand Danny Etling because he was such a, I'm going to just manage this game. I'm not going to do any more. I'm not going to do any less. I'm just going to manage. I'm going to throw for 16 touchdowns and 2 picks, but I'm not going to take risks. I'm not going to spread the field. I'm not going to make big plays. They're looking for big plays and a guy to spread the field.
Well, and I mean, this was a long time ago. This was back in January. But I'm looking at an article here from SECcountry.com, and this is Alex Hickey who wrote this article, and it's basically who's going to win the starting job for the running backs. And he had mentioned that, all right, Nick Brossette is probably the favorite to win this job. But here's the thing that I find interesting. He goes, and I quote, "To me, the most intriguing candidate in the competition is sophomore Clyde Edwards-Helaire," right?
Yeah.
Helaire. Edwards-Helaire has the skill set to be the ideal third down back on any roster in America. One of the most underrated plays of the 2017 LSU season was his 27-yard reception against Texas A&M. He turned an ordinary swing pass into a shake and bake gain to the Aggies' 1-yard line. Now we have to see if he has the endurance to be the feature back with his 5'8", 280-pound frame. And to me, I think that's the biggest question is this is the first time, like last year or 2 years ago, Leonard Fournette was the main guy, but Darius Geis still got his. Last year, Darius Geis was the main guy. The next guy was Darrell Williams, but Darrell Williams ain't there. Like, there was no one, there was not that layering of, all right, that guy that's second behind Darius Geis, he's still going to be here next season. And for me, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is to me, the one that I would pick, basically because of what Alex said. I mean, he's a guy that can take a swing pass, shake it and bake it, turn it down the sideline, and get you big yards. That is what you need when you're going to be, because to me, LSU's question is not necessarily what we talked about with every other team in this conference except for Mississippi State. They're going to be judged on what do you do, how do you compete against Alabama, against Auburn. You were third last year. The only two teams you lost to in conference last year were those two teams. You can only get to where you want to go, which is playoff, by beating them. And that's what you need. He, to me, gives them the best shape to maybe do that because with these great defenses, especially Alabama, he could take an ordinary play and turn it into a miracle.
Well, what I think, Ricky, and what I've said for a while on this podcast is that to beat a team like Alabama, you need what? A good quarterback.
Yep.
And that's where I think LSU needs to focus the most. Because we know that they're not necessarily... there's not a Darius Geis and there's not a Leonard Fournette on the roster. You need to really focus.
We got a Leonard, but not a Leonard.
Leonard, but not a Leonard. Yeah, you got to be Leonard.
A few letters
Leonard.
off. A few letters
Leonard.
off.
Yeah, you got to really pronounce those the la or the le. See what I did? La or le. Yeah, I'm just being an idiot.
You are.
Thank you for agreeing with me. Most people would, but that's why I think the quarterback battle that's taking place and that will continue to take place is the most important. And for the wide receiver group, DJ Chark is gone, Russell Gage is gone. They had Derek Dillon and Steven Sullivan, who combined for 24 receptions last year and a touchdown. Not a lot, clearly, but at least they have some game experience. They're going to need other guys to be some reliable targets for him. But here's an interesting thing, too. Jonathan Giles is a transfer from Texas Tech. He could be huge for this LSU team. The last time he played was back in 2016. He was fourth in the Big 12 in receiving yards with 1,158 yards, 69 receptions, and 13 touchdowns. That's like almost unthinkable for an LSU team because they're so used to running the football. They need to get used to throwing it because to beat these teams, you need to have a really good offensive attack. And when I say these teams, I mean your Auburns, your Alabamas, your Mississippi States, your Texas A&Ms. You need to have a really good offensive attack. As important as defense is, that offense has to be moving. And you have to be a well-oiled machine. And it's something that I think Ed Orgeron is really seeing right now because I'm thinking he feels he doesn't have the Fournette and he doesn't have the Geis. He's got some good guys, but he doesn't have one of them that stands out, which is why now he really wants to push to be the pro-style offense where you have receivers on the field at all times and you're really moving the ball down the field through the air.
Well, and the thing that I look at kind of moving on into, we looked at the offense, now kind of taking a little peeksy-poo at the defense.
Peeksy-poo?
I don't know. It just came off. It came off the tongue like that. Kind of playing with some words here on the Primetime Podcast. But the big thing about LSU is they spent a little bit of moolah this offseason to basically keep their defensive coordinator away from Texas A&M. So you had defensive coordinator Dave Aranda. They basically said, we're going to guarantee you $10 million over 4 years if you would like to stay here and not join Jimbo Fisher. Aranda said, thank you. I will take my guaranteed $10 million and continue to work here for the purple and gold. Thing I want to ask you, it's not a new coach coming in. What do we expect from the LSU defense in now another season under Dave Aranda?
I think that Dave Aranda is finally going to be able to implement his defensive scheme and what he wants to do. Which
this will be his third year with the team.
I think which is something that's going to be really good. He's now got guys who have been there a couple of years, who've played with him, and now I think he gets to go kind of full out schemes in place. And that's going to be something that's helpful for him. He's got a couple of guys to work with as well. Junior inside linebacker Devin White, he led the SEC with 10.2 tackles per game in 17.
My favorite corner, not just because he's a Patrick Peterson mold, but because of his name, Greedy Williams.
Yes.
He's going to be huge, mainly because his first name's Greedy. Like, I want my cornerback to be named Greedy because that means he's just going to intercept the ball all over the place, I would think. But he's a guy that I want to watch for sure on this LSU team, be the shutdown corner for them. And basically, we're putting you on the number one receiver, man. Go ahead, shut him down. Make sure he doesn't get the ball.
I think that one spot, though, is going to be the other side. The other side, opposite Greedy, is who are they going to find to be the shutdown corner on the other side? And what about the rest of the secondary?
Yeah.
And how do you replace Arden Key, who was, when he was a healthy, Arden Key, that's a guy that you're still looking to try and replace. And I think that...
Well, and it looks like Kirkland, you have Cray Vincent, freshman Kelvin Joseph, and then a grad transfer in Terrence Alexander are all right now the kind of four guys they're thinking about to be that guy opposite of Williams.
So we're looking at a team that defensively, they don't boast as much as maybe a couple of the teams that we've talked about prior.
Or teams that we're going to talk about next.
Which is why LSU is still in that limbo of, they could go 9-4 again, but they may not, they just may not, that may be their ceiling. That may be their ceiling. And with this season, I'm very interested, and I don't want to necessarily move all the way from defense, but I'm so much more interested
in the offense
on how this team is going to be offensively. You don't have, even with Danny Etling being so you at least knew what you were going to get from him, and you knew who it was going to be. Now you don't necessarily know who it's going to be, and you don't know what you're going to get from him, and you're changing schemes, and you don't have that solidified running back in place, and you've got wide receivers there, but no one that's been there. I'm just kind of like, how is it going to go for LSU this year?
So I'm thinking the same thing a little bit, but so here's the thing I'm going to say before I get into what I'm going to say is, I know that kind of sounded redundant, but play with me, is in the last segment with Mississippi State, I asked the question of which team I think will finish above the other. I am changing my mind, I want to say, from just a segment ago. I think LSU is going to finish fourth in this side of the SEC. And the reason why I say that is I look at their schedule. Last year, they had 3 losses before their bowl game. They lost to Alabama, Troy, Mississippi State. 2 of those, I think, stay the same. I think Mississippi State beats them. I think Alabama beats them. Although those 2 games are at home this year. Auburn, they beat Auburn last year, but it was a 4-point game. I think Auburn in Auburn wins that game. I think playing in LSU is a big kind of punch for that. They'll win that game. Florida's going to be interesting. You only beat them by 1 point last year, and that was in Gainesville. You're at home this year. I still think they could beat Florida. But there's one team in the SEC that they're going to play this year that I am, just like the Alabama game, giving them no chance to win this game, although it is at home. That is Georgia. They are not going to beat Georgia. They're not even going to come close in that game. They get blown out against Alabama and Georgia. So this is what I'm thinking. Because of quarterback question, because of running back question, the defense is going to be pretty much our only solidified option at this point. Miami, you come in, Miami's going to be playing better this year. I think you lose by 3 points. It's a tough loss. You lose on a neutral site to the Miami Hurricanes and Mark Richt, who's an SEC caliber coach in the ACC. So you start out 0-1. Then you play Southeastern Louisiana, SC Louisiana. Doesn't matter. You win that game easily. You're 1-2. Then you play Auburn. You lose that game. You're 1-1. Now you're 1-2. La Tech, you beat them. Ole Miss, you beat them. All right, you're 3-2. Florida, now you're 4-2. Then you play Georgia. You're 4-3. Then you play Mississippi State. You're 4-4. Then you play Alabama. You're 4-5. And then you go to 6-5, and then that Texas A&M game's that toss-up to where do you finish 6-6 or do you finish 7-5? I'm going to lean more towards the 7-5 just because I want to give you that better record. But I could see Texas A&M winning that game because that is at Kyle Field. Will this be the year LSU takes a little bit of a dip because of those offensive questions and because of the schedule? I don't like the schedule, but I will say the saving grace for them is that Georgia, Mississippi State, Alabama, they're all home games. They are all home games right in a row. However, I don't see them winning that death. I'm going to call it a death lineup. And I don't think they win those 3 games. And we're going to look back and say, man, if they would have just won one of those games, it would have been a better season for LSU.
Well, I can see 4 losses on their schedule right off the bat. It starts with game 1 with Miami.
Mm-hmm. I like Miami this year. I think they'll be better.
Well, I really liked Miami last year. Mm-hmm. I mean, to say that they'll be better is like saying that the sun is like too hot.
Now they're just going to have 2 suns that rise.
You know, I think that basically Miami was really good last year. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hard to be a whole lot better this year, but getting to the playoff would be better for them. So Miami could be a loss week 1 right off the bat. I like the scheduling, though. Week 3, on the road at Auburn. I mean, you're playing against a solidified quarterback in Jarrett Stidham. Mm-hmm. He's still there, and it's still going to be difficult.
Yep.
And then Georgia. You have them at home, but they're good. They're really good.
I mean, taking a fish hook through the calf or not, Jake from State Farm's going to light you up in that game.
But I think that not only do you have to look at their offense, their defense run by a very great defensive-minded coach in Kirby Smart. Yeah, you lose a guy like Roquan Smith. That's going to be a tough loss, but guys like Kirby Smart and the way that he recruits, they always have the next man up.
Top recruiting class, too. Class.
So there's another one, and then Alabama. Those 4 right off the bat I look at and I go, I don't see LSU being the better team in that game.
So are those your only losses, or are those are my 4? Sure?
Those are my 4 right off the bat.
Okay.
Right now,
because Mississippi State and Texas A&M.
I'm giving kind of toss-ups with Mississippi State and Texas A&M. I'm doing it for both of them. I'm not saying or declaring that there's a winner in that game right now because I don't have to. You can't make me. But I just know
we'll get to we'll get to that time when we make our picks in the season.
Yeah, I'm not ready yet. It's too premature. But definitely 4 losses that I see, possibly more. I need to go through the summer a little bit more and see where LSU is and see where they've come offensively, see what the decisions have been made, see where guys are at, all that kind of stuff. Because right now, just one big question mark on their offense.
Here's the thing. Texas A&M, I'll give it a toss-up because they have pretty much, we talked about the same question that LSU has, who's going to be their starting quarterback. However, for Mississippi State, because we just talked about them, the reason why I'm more confident in them is Nick Fitzgerald, to me, beats out any quarterback that LSU has. And I know Mississippi State has a new head coach coming in, but the question of quarterback, running back, if it was just quarterback, it'd be different. If it was just running back, it'd be different. But because it's both, I am going to be a little bit more confident in Mississippi State than I am. But then I gave you a win against Florida. That could be a loss. You only won that game by 1 point. Yeah. And this time you're going to Gainesville to play that game. Like Auburn, yeah, you won that one, but this time you're going to Auburn to play that game. So, I mean, LSU, this might be the season where they go 6-6, maybe 7-5 at best. But then at the end of the year, we're looking and going, man, if they had just a better quarterback, they win some of these games and they put themselves in a position like they were last year. But this season then might be seen, though, as a step back than what we saw a year ago.
I wonder if LSU looks at a season this year where, like you said, it's a step back a little bit, but it's a step back just a bit to try and get guys that are, I don't want to say get guys, but I'm not saying bring in guys, but another year under the belt for some of these guys to get them more experience. And then next year, they'll be back to where they'd like to be. Because I wonder if it's one of those years where you have a little bit of a down year, you take a step back, but then the year after you're right back to 9-4 or 10-3 or 10-4, whatever it is. So I wonder if it's going to be something like that.
Well, and here's the thing: I don't want to start anything if I don't have to, but this just popped into my head because they're playing Georgia this year. How many LSU fans look at it? Because you look at last year, and if you're LSU, your only expectation for this year should be, how do we get ourselves to the top of the West? If you're in the top 3 of the West, your goal then each year is, how do we knock off Alabama? How do we get to the top of the West? And with Ed Orgeron, he has now been there. This will be his, 3rd season at LSU? It will also be Kirby Smart's 3rd year at Georgia. And I wonder if LSU fans during that game, while Georgia's blowing you out, because I'm pretty much putting it as a blowout right now for Georgia, how many fans will be sitting there watching that game going, wow, this is a guy who came in the same year our guy did, brought them to a 13-2 season last year, and a national championship game appearance, not just college football playoff, but national championship game appearance. And our guy has brought us to 6-2, 9-4, and then this year, no playoff. 1-2 in your bowl game. And you lost to Notre Dame, I believe, last year in your bowl game, which shame on you, because mostly everyone beats Notre Dame these days. That's
completely false.
I just like to throw a little
try.
shade at Notre Dame because I think Brian Kelly should get fired, but that is a separate conversation for a separate day. I wonder if at the end of this year LSU fans go, do we think about getting rid of Ed Orgeron? If it's 6-6, if it's 7-5, but more so, I'll lean towards that 6-6 number. If you go 6-6. Do LSU fans start going, maybe it's time to get, like, Aranda's fine. Maybe it's time to get a new head coach in here because Ed Orgeron's not cutting it.
I think that Ed Orgeron right now is actually not doing a bad job. There were some times last season for LSU where it wasn't good. Were they not the ones who lost to Troy?
They did.
And everyone was like,
Troy.
Holy God, what's going on? And it was like, whoa, this is a team in turmoil. And they turned it around and they really ended up finishing out the season strong. And that's what Ed Orgeron has brought to this team too, is you had a terrible game, but let's not lose the fight. Let's not lose the will to win. And they didn't. So if you have a down year, people will be mad. Fans will be upset. They should be. They're fans. They want their team to do well. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to get fired.
Well,
we should be calling for him to get fired.
And the thing is, LSU fans are going to get mad. I brought that up. It's an outsider's opinion, like an outsider's question. I'm not an LSU fan. I'm not in that kind of circle, so it's an outsider kind of asking that question. And also, I look at it and I go, because you look at a guy like Kirby Smart, and yeah, it might be a different situation. You could say that, but it's pretty good year. Boom, they're off to the races. But for Georgia, will this year be the year where it's like, all right, they fell down to earth a little bit? The last year was just all the stars aligned, and they really, because we didn't expect last year to be what it was for Georgia at the beginning of the year, and then it kind of just happened that way. Any final thoughts on LSU before we go into the big two dogs and move into the state of Alabama?
No.
This is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section about the quarterback battle for LSU. You can see above Brandon's head where we talked about the Joe Burrow transfer about 2 weeks ago. So that one is still fresh off the mic, still 2 weeks into this year. Well, two weeks old. That is not a lot of time when you're a newborn. But let us know what you think about the quarterback battle, the running back battle, the schedule, and what you guys think your team will do this year. Let's move on, though, into our next team. And the one thing I got to say is if you're on podcast services around the world, you're like, all right, same podcast as usual. If you're on YouTube right now, you're like, whoa, Brandon changed his shirt. Because I wore the same thing on purpose. So we were recording this on Wednesday, or a Wednesday, because this is going to go up a week later. But we recorded it on a Wednesday. Didn't have time to finish these last two. Brandon is wearing a new shirt. I still have my Bob Ross shirt on because I'm like, I want to stay consistent for this segment or for these last two. But we got to go into our last two. And the first one we'll go into is the Alabama Crimson Tide, or Roll Tide. And here's the thing. There's a ton of things we could look at. Here's what I want to start with. Quarterbacks. And the reason why I want to start with quarterbacks is there's a controversy, it seems like, with the Crimson Tide. You have Jalen Hurts, starts for the majority of the season last year, for everything but one half of one game. And then you have Tua come in. He comes in second half of the, or I don't even think it was second half. Maybe it was just the overtime. He comes in the overtime game. I think it was the second half. Plays really well, brings them to overtime, wins the game in overtime. We then learned this offseason that Tua was he was thinking about transferring during last year until the national championship game, and then that changed his mind altogether. So, Brandon, what I want to ask you, with no biases, because, yeah, we all have our favorite teams. Mine might stink, but yours is really good in Alabama football. I want to ask you, who starts this season, or who should start this season? Jalen Hurts, who it was his job for the majority of the year, or when Tua took over the job in that national championship game, was that Tua taking the job over then and now?
Well, let me give you a little longer answer than just a yes or a no.
Thank you. I would
be.
Love that.
And so Jalen Hurts, he was the SEC Offensive Player of the Year as a true freshman.
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding guy. Can do it all with his arm, with his legs. People have always said he needs to do more with his arm, and I would be one of those people. He needs to do more. He needs to get better. He needs to get more accurate, and he needs to just get stronger with his arm. Last year, he goes for over 2,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, 1 interception, 855 rushing yards, 8 scores on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that was erased in people's minds during the national championship game where he goes 3 of 8 in the first half for 21 yards. He had 6 carries for 47 yards,
now,
that was it.
Now, the thing is, and I don't want to be like, oh, well, there's excuses, but I do want to say, was A, going up against Georgia. That was a really tough defense. And A, was going up against Kirby Smart, which usually last year Kirby Smart told us one thing, or showed us one thing. He puts his guys in the best chances to succeed, the best opportunities to succeed, and he makes the best adjustments at halftime usually.
So then you go over to Tua. Hurts gets benched at the half.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are thinking, is Saban crazy? Like, Tua hasn't been playing a whole lot. This is the national championship game.
Something we would never see with anyone else.
Is this gonna turn out okay, or is this kind of gonna be the fall of Alabama football? Mm-hmm. And when I say the fall, I mean you lose this one, and it's like, all right, are they now going? Are they not going to be back here again next year? Tua comes in, he goes 14-24, 166 yards, 3 TDs, 1 interception, and the big TD, the 41-yard bomb at the end of the game in overtime to win it. The guy who I think is going to be starting at the beginning of this season, who's starting against Louisville, is Tua Tagovailoa. Voiloa. Excuse me, it's sometimes a little hard to say the last name.
I just avoid the last name altogether and just say Tua.
But the reason being is because he is similar in terms of what Jalen Hurts can bring. Throws the ball well, can run the ball well. He is a dual threat quarterback, but with a stronger arm and more accurate arm. And we saw that in some of the throws that he threw. We saw that in that 41-yard bomb that he threw to finish off the game, to walk off on Georgia. Tua suffered a thumb injury over the spring, something that he's needed some time to come back from, should be fine by fall. This is a guy who, as much as I love Jalen Hurts, I think that it's got to be Tua that ends up being the starter. But how about this? Could Alabama and the Crimson Tide take a page out of what they did at Ohio State and turn Jalen Hurts into a wide receiver so that you keep him on the field like they did with, who was it, J.T. Barrett and Braxton Miller?
Well,
and
it was Braxton.
Or was it
Braxton? JT was just benched. It was Braxton Miller that changed to the wide receiver.
Yeah, but who's the quarterback then?
It was Cardell Jones.
Cardell Jones. That was Cardell Jones' time.
Remember,
I wasn't sure if it was JT
we ain't
or
here
not.
We ain't here to play school.
I couldn't remember who it was at the time, but they did that, and that worked out fairly successfully for them. I don't know if that's something that Alabama would consider. I don't know if that's something that they would want to do. I don't know if that's something that Hurts would ever want to do, but it's a way to keep him on the field. Because when it comes down to it, one of these guys I see winning the job and keeping that job. And the reason why I think it's Tua is because of the fact that he's going to bring you a little bit more consistency through the air.
It's interesting, and I wasn't thinking that in total of what you were saying. I wasn't expecting you to bring up the switch to wide receiver, but when you think about it from a team, if Hurts can play wide receiver and he's willing to give it a shot, I would say why not? And the reason why I say that is we all know Calvin Ridley was the main wide receiver last year. He had 63 catches and was 30.9, basically I'm going to round up 31% of the team's total receptions. The next best wideout in terms of receptions was the guy who's most likely going to be the number one this year in Jerry Jeudy, where he only had 14 last year.
But he's going to be good.
He's going to be good.
He had flashes.
Here's the thing, and maybe this is me coming from an outside perspective. Most of the guys they look at in the wide receiver, whether it's Jeudy, whether it's Ruggs III, whether it's Smith, none of these guys are like, oh my God, watch out for this guy. Like, nationally, no one's talking about. Maybe it's because of where we're at in the year and we haven't really geared up for college football yet. But if Jalen Hurts can give a little boost to that wide receiver core, I would say why not? If he doesn't want to, then all right, you'll play the bench. Because here's what was going through my mind when it comes to Tua and Jalen Hurts. And this is kind of what I compare it to. Is, to me, Tua, there shouldn't be a quarterback competition. It should be Tua's job. Because A, if you didn't play him in the championship game, you lose that game. No way Jalen Hurts wins that game for you. The way I look at it, and this is maybe a little bit of, I'm going to compare it to some Oregon Ducks here. Because back in my life, before we started MVP, before I got into the podcast game, I used to write for the Fansided Network. And my first kind of site before I had the Illinois website was the Oregon site. That was the one that I was a staff writer on. So I was watching a lot of Oregon football between basically, I want to say 2010 and 2012 or 2009, 2012. 2010, 2012. And in that was the national championship season. So here's what I'm comparing these two Alabama quarterbacks to, because I know you're like, Ricky, get to the effing point. Here's what I think. Jalen Hurts is like your Darren Thomas. Tua is like your Marcus Mariota. Which one would you rather have? Both went to a national championship game. Both lost that national championship game. Well, Darren Thomas to Auburn, Marcus Mariota to Zeke and the Buckeyes. Who would you rather have starting? Maybe this is me putting in the NFL side of it as well. A guy who, and I believe Tua could be this, a guy who got drafted in the top 5, top 2, or a guy that went undrafted. And that's what these two are. Tua is a guy who, once he starts playing every single game, he's going to be in mocks. We're going to be talking about him for the NFL draft. He might not be exactly like Marcus Mariota and be the second quarterback off the board or the first quarterback off the board, but I bet you if he has that full season, we are talking about him being a first-round quarterback. Jalen Hurts reminds me of Darren Thomas to keep the Oregon one, or a Blake Sims, in the fact of real good in college, real good, wins you games, but he's not that next echelon. And I think Tua is that next echelon, and we saw it in a small sample size on the biggest stage last year. We saw a glimpse of it, and if he starts this year, we're going to be able to see that for the entire year, because this offense, wide receiver is a question, but look at the running backs. Bo Scarborough, he's the only one gone. Damian Harris, still there. You've got Najee Harris, still there. You've got Jacobs, still there. All these guys are still there. Why not put in the quarterback that, even though it was a small sample size, played the best on the biggest stage with maybe the least prep time? Because I don't know if Tua knew that he was going to go in the second half, but I don't think he did. And that's why I would say, not just that, but everything that I've said is why I would start Tua over Jalen Hurts in 2018.
And I think that if Tua ends up being the guy to start, I don't think that there's going to be any hard feelings coming from Jalen Hurts because of just the way. Of course, you're a competitor. You want to be able to win that spot, but I think he's going to accept whatever role he gets, and I think Tua would be the same way if Jalen Hurts were to get to win the starting position. Jalen Hurts acted with such class in that national championship game. Dude was just happy to win. Yeah. He was happy to win, and whatever they do to ensure that they continue to win, that's what they're going to do. And I think that that's a good teammate. That's a good guy. I think that it's going to be really interesting with this team this year because while I see a lot of good things happening on the offensive side, I think Tua will do a lot of good things if he is indeed the starter. I love Damian Harris. It is great having him there. He's going to be going for his third straight 1,000-yard season. He's a great running back. He's kind of a dual threat himself. The wide receivers, I'm not feeling too much of a question mark there. I like Jerry Jeudy. I like what he did this past year. Ruggs led the team in touchdowns, I think, with 6. There's a lot of promise with this wide receiver group. If indeed you ever fooled around with having Jalen Hurts line up as a wide receiver, that could be really interesting. That could be really interesting and see what he might be able to do for you. Now, maybe that's not something he wants to do. That's fine. But the question mark to me is going to be defense for this team because of the fact
I want to ask
that
one thing
Alabama
before we go on into the defense.
always going to win games, most likely because of their defense.
Last thing I want to ask about the offense, and then we'll go into defense, is, and this is a hypothetical, this isn't even about Alabama this year, this is just the quarterback thing to put a bow on it. Tua is a sophomore. Jalen Hurts is a junior this year. If Tua starts and wins the starting job, I'm putting you in the shoes of Jalen Hurts. If you were Jalen Hurts, would you think about transferring if Tua wins the job because you'd be thinking, well, he's a sophomore, he'll have it this year, he'll probably have it next year. I won't be able to start here, but I want to start maybe in my senior year, even if that's next year or if I have to take that transfer year off. Would Jalen Hurts, or would you transfer as Jalen Hurts if Tua wins the starting job.
I might kick the tires on it. I might kick the tires on transferring, but at the same time, you also want to win, and you know that with Alabama, you're most likely going to win. So that's where I would kind of be. It's like, where would I go? Where's there a program that I can go where I feel
that you would start
like
right away?
I'm going to start and have a good chance of being able to be at a winning program.
And not be like a Malik Zaire that comes in and it's like, well, you got replaced by Felipe Franks, and it was you and Franks, and it wasn't just you. I just think that's going to be an interesting thing that we talk about, because with Jalen Hurts, I think the big thing that's going to come down to him if he's the bench quarterback is, all right, I got 1 year of eligibility left. Do I want to use that as the backup at Alabama and win, like you said? Or, hey, you know what? I'm probably not going to get drafted in the NFL. Maybe if I do, it's like later on. But then if like I want to go after that NFL dream, that's going to be a lot of work. Do I just want to be able to say I've got that one last year to play as a starter before that football life kind of ends, because it's forcing me to end, not because I wanted to. So I think that's one thing that's going to be, we're going to talk about that a lot this season, I feel, with Tua and Jalen Hurts. But going on into the defense, like you mentioned, this is weird for Alabama. Like, usually it's dominant defense, like, oh, they've got a great defensive front. They lost this guy, and this guy, and great, they've got more coming. It just fucking feeds right in. Like, it comes off the conveyor belt here, we got a new one right behind them. However, this year I feel a little different. I feel like at all three levels, there are some holes to this defense to where if there's any missing link for the Crimson Tide in 2018, it might be on the defensive side, not the offensive side.
Yeah, I think that the defensive side, there's a reason to have question. Worry would not be the way that I would put it, but to have
Alabama, they usually win.
To have a question, and I would be looking at, with the biggest question mark or the most question marks, is kind of that last line of defense in the secondary. They've got a lot of holes to fill in the secondary position. Now, they lose Deron Payne up front, which is a huge loss, because that guy knew how to just bulldoze his way through an offensive line.
Well, and didn't they lose Deshaun Hand as well?
I believe so.
Didn't they lose him to the draft as well?
I believe so. But
that's two guys on that line,
They still have Raekwon Davis and Isaiah Buggs.
Yeah.
Those two guys came along pretty well at the end of last year. So I'm confident kind of in the linebacker area and outside linebacker, they're probably the strongest. But it's the secondary where I am a little worried. I am a little worried because they're going to be bringing in some new guys. We're going to see a lot of fresh faces in the secondary. There is no more Minkah Fitzpatrick, so you don't have your all-around, all-over-the-field type guy. We need to find a new guy to do that because, I mean, Minkah, his name was probably in on every play.
Yep.
You know, there's a tackle on this side of the field, Fitzpatrick. Well, there's a tackle over here, Fitzpatrick.
It was like even in the draft things that you would watch, everyone seemed to say with Minkah, it's like one of the best things about him is he just had a nose for the football.
Yeah.
Like, even when I was watching on NFL Live, they did a whole story around Minkah Fitzpatrick. 'Cause I guess, I can't remember where he lived. It was, like, the New York area, I want to say. But that was when Hurricane Irene came right through. Yeah. So they kind of, like, interviewed the backstory of, like, them losing their house and him having to traveling an hour to school just to play football and the sacrifice his parents made for that. It was a really interesting piece by ESPN, like they always are when they get you with those touching stories. But it was like, even his dad in that was like, yeah, the first time he put on pads, even in like Pop Warner, it was like, this kid has a nose for the football. And he was always there on every play, even if it was all the way across the field. And that carried with him, especially when to now where he's in the NFL and he's still like that.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to come by guys like that. You know, you don't have guys like that.
They just don't grow on trees, and you can't just pick them off.
Exactly, and they don't come in every draft class is incorrect, but recruiting class.
Yep,
they don't come in every single one of those, and if they are, they're not going to every team. So that's why replacing him is going to be very important, and by replacing him, it's not. It's a complete replacement. You know, it's not something where, you can just step right in and, hopefully. No, I mean, he was a guy, like you mentioned, all over the field, nose for the football, and Alabama's got to try and find that next guy who can be somewhat similar to that. And if they can't, they need to be able to find a couple of guys who can fill that void. Because Minkah Fitzpatrick was, I think, the soul of that defense. I really do. And now that he's gone, it's going to be interesting to see how things come along. And I never worry, really, and that's why I didn't use the word worry. I used the word question. I can't worry while Nick Saban is the head coach.
Yeah.
I just can't.
Well, it's the way I compare it with Alabama is I'm going to use it where the college football playoff, I will always put them in my college football playoff until they prove me wrong.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Warriors and the Cavs. Always going to make that my NBA Finals until someone... The Rockets almost did it. They almost proved me wrong. But it was like, I am always going to pick the Warriors until someone proves me wrong. I will.
And you're always
going to
pick the Cavs until LeBron leaves.
Really, yeah, until LeBron leaves. That's what I was going to say. It's really picking LeBron James. But, I mean, that's kind of how it is with Alabama. Like, I'm going to pick them to make the playoff until that year they don't. Then I'm going to think about it. Because, to me...
And we were almost thinking about it this year.
Almost. Well, kind of moving into their schedule, I look at this and I go, there's only one team on this schedule that I could see as a possible loss.
And that's Auburn at the end of the year.
No, I'm kidding. It's Auburn, of course.
I was like, what?
No, it's not the Citadel. It's Auburn. But the best was how silent you got, and I got when I said the Citadel. But Auburn, here's how I see the schedule, and they're the easiest. Auburn's the only game that I could see a loss. Mississippi State, maybe, but that's only because you played them close last year. The only reason I don't see Mississippi State as a win for Mississippi State is because they're playing at Alabama this year. And same thing for the Iron Bowl. You're playing at Alabama this year. So really, this schedule should line up for the Crimson Tide. The question is, and I don't even know why it's a question because they prove me wrong each time, is are they going to have a challenge in Louisville? Probably not, and they'll win that one too. It's not like Lamar Jackson's there. I mean, with Louisville, I don't know what kind of a team we're going to see overall and what the quarterback situation is going to look like. But the only thing that could give Louisville a chance in that one, and it's not really a chance, but I mean, that one's being played in Orlando, Florida. It's a little bit further than Nick Saban likes to go for those neutral siters. Usually he likes to go to, Texas. All right, that might be further than Florida, but a Texas. Ooh, we're going to go to Atlanta, nice and close to Alabama. So, I mean, with it being in Florida and not being in a state that touches Alabama, I don't think Florida touches the state of Alabama. Maybe on the little Cape it does, and I'm bad at geography. That Louisville game, maybe, but I still see it as a win for Alabama, and they'll go win until they get to Auburn, and then it's like, all right, we'll see. Here's where they're at. This is their playoff game.
I don't see them having too many tough contests this year. I really don't. Louisville, I think that they should take care of business there. Arkansas State should be rolling right through them. Ole Miss, Texas A&M, we'll see what happens there and what kind of game Texas A&M can give them because you've got Jimbo Fisher there.
I would say LSU if they had a better quarterback. I would say LSU because it's in Death Valley.
I would not say if they had a better quarterback. I would say if I felt that they were going to be a confident offense, and if I felt confident in their offense, and if I felt that they would be consistent throughout the season, which obviously
probably
that is yet to be seen because we haven't started play.
Well, who knows? That this defense for Alabama could come out and crap the bed game one, and then we completely change our narrative about Alabama after that first game. I just don't see.
Then I just want to keep. I just want to keep going. Then here, Louisiana, that should be a win. Arkansas, a win. Missouri, Tennessee, LSU on the road, like you said. We'll see where LSU's at that point in the season, how they're playing. Could be a fun game. Mississippi State could be a close game, like you said, because of last year. The Citadel, always a close one. And then Auburn is going to be really interesting because they had Auburn at the end of the year last year, and that ended Alabama's season. The loss to Auburn was the end of their regular season. That will be another good game. I will guarantee that.
Here's the thing I think about with Alabama, and I'm going to compare them yet again to the Warriors because I've already done that.
Warriors, the Yankees.
Well, think about it this way. There's only two ways Alabama loses. If the other team, number one, the other team comes in with a perfect game plan and has players that are rival to what Alabama has. Think of when Clemson beat them, Deshaun Watson. Think about when Georgia almost beat them. Up until Tua came in, Georgia, I know, slow start, but they got everything locked down, and they were shutting down that game for the most part. Think about whenever they lose to Auburn, except for the miracle kick, usually it's that Auburn team, that one's usually a coin toss anyways, because Auburn's a good team. Usually they come in with the same intensity that Alabama does. Other than that, every other game that I've almost seen Alabama lose, it's kind of like how Wilbon described the Golden State Warriors, where they're that kid that sits in the back of the class. I'm going to get the A. I don't need to study. And then it's like they get a few Fs on quizzes, and it's like, don't worry. I got this in the bag. Ace the final, A in the class. And they just do one of these, flip down the sunglasses as they walk out for the summer. That's usually Alabama each and every year. It takes a phenomenal team to beat them that has the talent to rival them. Otherwise, it's just them, I don't want to say getting lazy, but basically being that kid in the back that I got it, I don't have to work right now. And then when the test comes, they work for it.
It takes a team that's got a good quarterback to beat Alabama. Texas A&M, we'll see who they end up going with, if it's Starkel or if it's going to be Mond. Mississippi State is going to be interesting. Nick Fitzgerald and how he's playing. LSU.
With their quarterback carousel.
I mean, they've got, 3 or 4 different guys, but we think it's going to be Burrow.
I'm thinking.
And then Auburn, Stidham. They all have decent quarterbacks. And if they can show up against an Alabama defense in a secondary, that it remains to be seen how they will produce. How they will do against, jump balls and everything like that when they're going up for them. That will be interesting. We'll see.
And for me, the last thing that I will say before we move on is, yes, you're probably sitting there thinking, wow, you guys are kind of the same thing as last year. Same thing as always. Alabama, they got a few questions here, this, that. Get to the schedule. Wins. This could be, I will say, if there's going to be any season that starts the tipping point to kind of challenge our norm, our reality of Alabama winning everything but losing to Auburn, if anything, if there's any season that's going to challenge it, this might be the one. However, at this point in the season that hasn't even started yet, there's a lot of questions to where everything's cloudy. You just said it. Texas A&M, Mississippi State, LSU, all have questions with quarterback. Auburn has a good quarterback coming in. They're the only ones right now that I would give a puncher's chance to beat Alabama this season. But it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out this offseason, this summer, as we get ready then for the start of the season in August. Any last thoughts before we move on into the Auburn Tigers?
I think the only thing that I would have left to say with Alabama is defensively, they're going to go through a transition period a little bit. The guys they have on the roster are very talented. It's just how well do those guys transition into starting roles from guys who were not starters last year or to guys who are being thrown right in as starters this year, and how they are able to accept that role and how they're going to be able to take that role and really just grasp, I don't want to say the playbook, but how they're going to be able to take it and really embrace that role and run with it.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let us know down below. What do you guys think about the Alabama Crimson Tide this year and anything we talked about about good old Roll Tide. But Brandon, let's close out the podcast looking at the Auburn Tigers. And I know what some of you might be saying, because I think, Brandon, you made the same mistake when you were coming up with our notes. You were like going through everything. You're like, Alabama's last, right? Because they won the national title. It's like, double not so fast, my friend. They did not win the SEC.
Double not so fast. I love it.
It was Auburn that won the SEC, and that's why we are ending with the Auburn Tigers, because they finished atop the SEC West last year. And here's the first thing I want to ask you. When you look at the Athlon Sports preview for the Auburn Tigers, it says this. The equation, and this is for the offense, the equation is simple for Auburn's offense under Gus Malzahn. If the veteran coach has a quarterback he trusts to make plays with his arm and his legs, or his legs, then you can expect the Tigers to challenge for the SEC title. So this is me. Jarrett Stidham is still there. Veteran quarterback, Gus Malzahn can trust to make plays with his arm and his legs. So I'm going to ask you this. Does Auburn, I'll just hit you with the heavy question. Does Auburn win the SEC title this year? Do they win just the SEC West, or do they finish second in the division? Where do you see this Auburn team with Jarrett Stidham? Can they challenge for the SEC title and actually win it this year?
I think that Auburn can win the SEC West, and it's not because of just Jarrett Stidham. It's because they are probably going to push for one of the best defenses in the country. They have a very
rival Georgia,
very good defense. They could. They're strong.
Because
they're very strong.
Last year we saw phenomenal defense out of Georgia. It just seems like that's what they do in the SEC. They just play defense and use great quarterbacks to try to beat them. I feel like with Jarrett Stidham, last year, here's what I'm thinking. Last year, they got through the West. I'm not questioning that they can get through the West. It's when they get to Georgia, because it's interesting. I'll just get to the schedule right away. I know I'm kind of throwing everything off. They play Georgia on their schedule. They actually play Georgia on Dave Oster's birthday. It's a Saturday, November 10th, at Georgia. Yeah, if they lose that game, as long as they beat Alabama, then they should probably be in the title. My whole thing, or the SEC title. The thing that I think about is that game, I'm circling it right now. I can't wait for it. I'm marking the calendars. Dave, I hope you don't want to do anything on your birthday because I'm watching that game. And the reason why I'm watching that game is because that will have implications on not just the SEC, but that will have implications on the college football playoff, where for Auburn's side, like I said, yeah, if they lose, okay, we knew we had to beat Alabama anyways just to get in for the SEC title. Well, here's the thing. Alabama got in losing a game last year. They didn't even win their conference. Didn't win it. They just got in with one loss. So how's that going to play off if Auburn loses it and maybe has to play Georgia? Because I'm assuming if they lose to Georgia at that point, but then beat Alabama, that we would just be gearing up for Georgia-Auburn Part 2 in the SEC title game. However, the other thing could happen. We could have, oh man, if we didn't lose that Georgia game, we would have been able to get into that game, because what if Alabama beats them and there's this weird thing? Like, oh man, we should have beat that Georgia team. But what about on the other side? What if Georgia falls off a little bit and Auburn beats them, wins their side of the conference, and then maybe has to play a Florida in the title game? Like, that game to me is going to be huge for this season. And if what I think right now is going to play out, Auburn loses that game, then if they beat Alabama, win that side of the title, then beat Georgia, that having a double Georgia on your schedule might be able to help Auburn get to the college football playoff if they can win the West and win the SEC title.
And I see already 10 wins on this schedule for Auburn. I see 10 wins on the schedule, and then you've got the Georgia game and the Alabama game, 2 games on the road.
So you're saying every game besides Georgia and Alabama are wins?
Yeah.
Okay. The only game I was going to ask you about, and I don't think this is going to be a loss for them, it's just interesting, the Washington one. Because, we're going to get to them later on.
I have zero worry about Washington.
The only reason I ask that is with Washington is, A, Jacob Eason going to be the guy there to start, and how is he going to look with that Washington team? But like you said, I'm not saying that the Huskies win that game. I'm just saying
you shouldn't be saying
I'm
that.
a little interested just because of the Jacob Eason variable to that equation.
Yeah, that doesn't worry me. I think that, again, you look at this Auburn
it's
defense.
Alabama State that worries you, right?
Oh, they do. Auburn, if you look at this defense, they have a really stacked defensive front. One of the things with them, though, which is why, I think that they could win the West. They also have questions in the secondary. That's going to be their number one question, similar to Alabama. But I think they have a stronger and more experienced defensive front than Alabama, maybe boasting this season, at least on paper here to start.
Yeah.
We are looking at a team that is going to be pretty solid throughout. Jarrett Stidham is your quarterback again. This guy really knows how to stretch the field, go vertical, and he does it well. They lost a couple of receivers to knee injuries in the spring, but they are bringing a couple of guys back. Kerryon Johnson and Cameron Petway are both gone, but you have Cam Martin there looking for a 1,000-yard season, so you've got some consistency there. You've got to replace 3 offensive linemen. There are questions around this team, but I don't think enough to knock them too far from the pedestal where they were at the end of last season.
Just to say, those 2 wide receivers that you mentioned with the knee injuries, Will Hastings and Eli Stove, are the 2 guys that they lost in the spring drills to knee injuries. But I mean, the thing I look at is, here's what I think about with this team. With all the questions you just said with Auburn, and I know it's kind of a little bit different than Alabama, because I think at Alabama, who we just talked about, they both have Auburn and Alabama, the questions at cornerback or secondary, but I think Alabama has more questions in the other 2 departments than Auburn does. Like, I'm going to read a quote here from the Athlon Sports Preview when talking about their linebacking core. This is Auburn. The biggest concern at linebacker is finding enough snaps to keep everyone content. I don't know about you, B. That is a good problem to have. I would be happy to have that problem if I'm a head football coach. I'd rather have too much than not enough, and that goes with anything in life, mainly money. But the thing that I look at is this team has 2 of the things that you need to win a championship. A stout defense, which I only say that because, they have the questions at cornerback, but they're more solidified, I would say, at the other 2 levels than in Alabama, although Alabama, I think, is going to win every game. And then that Auburn game is the coin toss that we always see. And they have the quarterback, the veteran quarterback, because the thing we talked about, and we got to bring Alabama into this because they're the 1-2 punch in the West. Even if Tua starts, let's say Tua starts because both you and I said that's who we would have. Tua played phenomenally at the highest level, but he's not as experienced as Jalen Hurts. Yeah, Jalen Hurts will be on the bench and kind of be like a JT Barrett was to Cardell Jones, to Braxton Miller, to everyone that took the job before he was given the job, before he graduated. And I just feel like Stidham is more experienced. The defense is a little bit more solid. Injuries can happen, but knock on wood, they don't. I feel like this point in the year, I know it's early, it's only June, so it's not like we're anywhere near the season. Maybe I'm overhyping it a bit, but this could be a very special season for the Tigers. And if they play well every game and they go out there and they solve some of these questions, mainly in the offense, they at least have the two pieces, defense and a veteran quarterback, that they could be a team where it's like, oh, they're making the playoff this year and they're going to the playoff from the SEC.
I think you could be right. I think that what we saw last year in the Auburn-Alabama game was that Auburn was able to stretch the field a little bit on Alabama, and then they wore them down with the run. And I know that was with Kerryon Johnson, but Cam Martin, I think, can do the exact same type of thing. I mean, he averaged 6.1 yards a carry last year. He didn't start, the games. So, and that's in limited time. So there's a lot of hope for this Auburn team, and I know that other teams on their schedule that will be, and fans of those teams that are on their schedule that are watching this and saying, you a-holes are just completely counting out our teams. Well, there's a reason to get excited about that last game on the schedule. Because of last year that Auburn won that game, and two, because it's happening again this year. Same game, same time is happening again this season. And it is most likely, as we speculated earlier on in this preview, going to come down to that last game. Who wins that last game could, especially after what we saw last season, could be not only the SEC West winner, but could be going to the playoff.
So let me really quick run down the point totals or the scores from last year for Auburn. 41-7 they win. 14-6 they lose. 24-10 a win.
For the 14-6, that was to Clemson.
That was Clemson. 51-14 they win. 49-10 they win. 44-23 they win. 27-23 they lose. 52-20 they win. 42-27 they win. 40-17 they win. 42-14 they win. 26-14 they win. 28-7 they lose. And then they lost to the real national champions, if you ask the state of Florida, 34-27, Central Florida. My point, though, is not that. My point is, I know that first off, Georgia or Auburn fans are going to say, whoa, Ricky, what are you talking about this Georgia game? We blew them out of the water in that first game. Yeah, you did, but that was at home. You beat them at home, then you went to a neutral site and you only put up one touchdown. So I wouldn't say that you got the best of the Bulldogs in the end because they went to the national championship and you lost to the other national champions. Can we call them that? The other national champions in college football. But my point that I was really getting at is there are three scores that were the closest. 14-6 against the Clemson team where they lost. 27-23 at LSU. That game's going to be home this year. And then the Iron Bowl, which will now be on the road this year, 26-14. Their closest games. Every other game, every other SEC team, every other non-conference game blew them out of the water. Wasn't even close. The score shows that. And I think the same thing will happen this year, where most of these games will be blowouts. The only difference is that Washington game will not be as close as the Clemson game and will be a W. The LSU game might be that close, but will be a W for Auburn because it's at home. And the Alabama game might be a loss, and that's the only one where I can't give a win or a W because it's in Alabama. Auburn can win in Alabama, but that's the only game throughout all these schedules, I think, out of all these previews where I can't give a win and a loss, and it's the truest to a 50-50 that we have.
I can agree with you on the Alabama game. That one right now is almost a toss-up. It could go either way because both of these teams, they've got some really good pieces. They've got some definite question marks, certainly in the secondary for both of them.
And they're solidified at quarterback, no matter who Alabama picks.
But I think, though, that you're overlooking a little bit Texas A&M and Mississippi State. They have new head coaches in both spots. They're bringing a different scheme and a different culture to both spots. They're asking different things of their offense and their quarterback in both spots. We're going to see a Nick Fitzgerald, who hopefully is a little bit more accurate, goes back to 2016, where he went 21 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, instead of the 15 and 11 that he did this past year. You're going over to Texas A&M, where, again, you've got Starkel and you've got Mond, and it's, who's it going to come down to there? Mond, I believe, the better runner. And you've got Jimbo Fisher, a guy who knows how to work with quarterbacks, knows how to make them winners, because that's what he's come from. I don't think that we can count those out. I don't think that we can look at them as being, okay, maybe they're wins, but they may certainly not be blowouts. That's where this SEC this year may have a different feel than other years. You have new coaches here now. You've got a big new coach in terms of Jimbo Fisher. You brought over a big fish into the SEC West. And now it may be more interesting and more tight than any year we've seen before, at least in recent history and in recent memory, because these programs, and I'm not saying that they're going to be just turned around immediately, but you're high on Mississippi State. I'm high on Mississippi State. Texas A&M may push for 9 wins, maybe, if we're getting excited. LSU is going to coin flip. Not sure how they will be. This is going to be the top 4 to 5 teams. We're looking at, I think, some good competition up there. Now, I say that, and I've tried to talk these teams up, and they're just going to fall flat. But now that I've said it, but that's why it's Alabama and Auburn, that last game for sure. But you never know. We could finally be surprised during the regular season.
Well, and for me, this is my consistency. Although I'm high on Mississippi State, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Throughout this entire preview, I know it's been over 2 days for us, but over this entire preview, have I said that before these last 2, have I given any of the other teams in this conference, in this division, a win over either Alabama or Auburn?
No.
That's where I think they're the upper echelon. And that's the thing I will say is, yes, Jimbo Fisher's a big name. Yes, I expect them to kind of stay where they were, maybe 6-7 wins. However, that game's in Auburn. They're going to show strides this year. It's not going to end up in the win column. I'm not going to say it's a 51-10 blowout, but it's not going to work for them in the win column. The Mississippi State one's interesting because if Alabama knows anything, and this is for Auburn fans, that's what I'm saying, is if Alabama fans know anything, Mississippi State can play well at home. That game's at home. So I'll give Mississippi State I don't know if I want to say puncher's chance, but maybe you can upset. Maybe you can catch the Tigers sleeping on a game like that, because you got to think coming into that one, Auburn will be coming off of Southern Miss, which should be a 72-0 blowout. Nothing against Southern Miss, but that one should be blew out by the first quarter. Send in the second stringers. Stidham's going to the locker room. He's changing, getting his water because he's done for the day. That's how that game should go on in my mind. Yes, Mississippi State can't upset them. Do I see it? No, because, the thing with them is, like we talked about their coach, first Power 5 job. It's going to be different. It's a different level of competition, especially in the SEC when you're playing Auburn and you're playing Alabama. I think this season comes down to, in the West, I wouldn't be surprised if both Alabama and Auburn are undefeated going into that Iron Bowl game, which would be amazing. I would love to see that because, I love to see it. It'll probably be 1v2, undefeated versus undefeated. Winner gets to play Georgia. For Auburn, it would be a rematch against Georgia. And here's what I can see happening. Either with a win or a loss in that Georgia game for Auburn, whatever you want, that's where you'll put it at. But what I can see happening this year is Auburn beating Alabama, that being the only game the Crimson Tide lose. Then Auburn go into the SEC title game, beat Georgia, because that's, spoiler alert, who I think will win the SEC East this year. And think about this. What if we got a situation where in this situation, I'll say Auburn goes undefeated. So they beat Georgia twice. Auburn ends up being not just the SEC champ, the number 1 seed in the playoff. Alabama's only loss yet again is to Auburn. National semifinal game, 1v4, Iron Bowl Part 2. You're smiling because you know you want to see that. Like, that would be amazing. I am already concocting movie line stories in my head with this season. I could see that happening. Auburn going undefeated, being the number 1 team. Alabama only having that 1 loss. Iron Bowl Part 2, 1v4 in the national semifinal.
Let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. What if you say that, you say that, and I honestly think, and this is...
That I'm delusional?
No, but I would love to see what the fans think on this one, is that you say that if Auburn won, they go undefeated, they're the number 1 seed in the playoff, Bama could be the 4.
Well, that's just off of what we saw last year.
Yes. Is Bama only the 4 because it's Bama? If you flip it around and it's Alabama that goes undefeated and Alabama's number 1 in the playoff and Auburn had a chance to possibly be the 4 because that'd be their only loss, is the committee then looking elsewhere because it's just Auburn?
No. And the reason why I say that is it's just for clarification, it's a 1-loss Auburn team and their only loss is
you just flip it. You just flip your scenario.
No. And the reason why I'm saying that is it depends on how close Alabama is, but that's not a huge determinant in this case. It's the Georgia game. They win that Georgia game in Athens, they could lose in Alabama, and they could be Alabama of last year, where it's like, hey, we got a pretty good resume here. We only lost 1 game, and it was like, if they keep it close, and it was close. Now, the thing is with the committee that we see from year after year, what's going to be the hang-up this year? Last year, last year the hang-up was, we're talking conference titles. We had the debate. Do you need a conference title to make the playoff? Should you need a conference title to make the playoff? That's all we talked about towards the end of the year, because everyone's like, I wouldn't put Alabama in. They didn't win their conference. I'd put Alabama in. Look at who they played. What will be this year's thing that we just stick on? And that is what we talk about every single week. There's going to be something.
Always is.
And right now, I want to say yes, based off of what we saw last year. But we all know how the committee is. It's not a computer. It's real people. They change their minds left and right. I would love to think it'd be the same thing as last year, but there will be something else this year that makes the committee go, I know we did that last year, but what if we tried this? And I don't know what that is because I can't read the future.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just interested. I just wanted to see what your response would be.
Any final thoughts on this? Because I think we've kind of hit. I think we've hit everything.
I do too.
For the Auburn Tigers. So this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think about the Auburn Tigers down below. Auburn fans, I also want that. Give me both sides. So let's say you go undefeated, you play Alabama in the national semifinal game 1v4. Are you confident you win that game? And then give me the flip side. If you're on the other side, you're a 1-loss team, didn't win the conference, you're playing an undefeated Alabama team in that semifinal. Does it change at all, knowing that you lost to them before, won to them before? I would love to know what you think down below in the comment section. And that's going to do it for the Primetime Podcast. If you are on any of the podcast services, you're in for a doozy on this one. I think this is going to be an over 2-hour podcast. I think this is one that, because of file size, it's probably going to be split up into 2 parts on the website, because there's a certain file space before you got to break them up into 2. So that's how long this one might be. So thanks for checking it out. If you're on YouTube, thank you guys for checking out. Check out all our other previews as well. Housekeeping here at the end. Make sure to check out patreon.com/MostValuedPodcast to help support the channel. Make sure to check out our store to get our MVP t-shirt. You can get that link down below in the description, or at mostvaluedpodcast.com, where you can also catch everything for MVP each and every day. Also, please go on to iTunes. Please go on to Apple Podcasts. If you have either, Give the Primetime Podcast a 5-star rating. Type in a little something about why you like the podcast, why other people should watch and listen to the podcast. It would really mean the world to us. Thank you guys for watching on YouTube. Thank you guys for listening on podcast services around the world. And as always, have a good day, everybody.